A millionaire returns early to his mansion and sees his housekeeper's son playing in the garden. The boy runs toward him with open arms and shouts, "Dad!" In that instant, his perfect world crumbles. What would you do if you discovered a secret that could destroy everything you've built? Where in the world are you watching from? This story of power, betrayal, and redemption will leave you breathless. Subscribe now, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single episode of this story that has captivated millions. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Blackwood estate as Thaddeus Sterling's Bentley purred up the circular driveway. He hadn't planned to return home so early. Board meetings typically consumed his entire Thursday, but a migraine had forced an unexpected retreat to his sanctuary. As CEO of Sterling Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate, free time was a luxury he rarely afforded himself. Loosening his silk tie, Thaddeus instructed his driver to park around back. He'd enter through the garden, avoiding the main entrance, where Lorelei might be entertaining guests. His wife's social calendar rivaled his business one, and today he craved solitude. The gardens stretched behind the mansion like an emerald tapestry, meticulously designed with geometric precision. Thaddeus breathed in the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming roses, feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to unwind. Then he heard it. Laughter, high-pitched and carefree, floating through the air like wind chimes. Curious, he followed the sound around a tall hedge to the fountain area. A small boy, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, was sailing paper boats in the water. Autumn's son, he realized. His housekeeper occasionally brought her child to work during school holidays. Thaddeus had glimpsed the boy before but had never paid much attention. The staff and their families existed in a parallel universe, to his intersecting only when necessary. The child hadn't noticed him yet, too engrossed in his game. Thaddeus observed him, silently noticing the way the boy's brow furrowed in concentration as he adjusted one of his paper vessels. Something about that expression struck Thaddeus as oddly familiar. When the boy finally turned and spotted him, his face lit up with unexpected joy. Without hesitation, he ran toward Thaddeus, arms outstretched. "Daddy, you're home early." Thaddeus froze, the word echoing in his ears like a thunderclap. Before he could respond, the boy collided with his legs in an enthusiastic embrace. Instinctively, Thaddeus placed a hand on the child's head, feeling soft hair beneath his palm. Dark chestnut hair, the same shade as his own. Gently, he guided the boy back, bending slightly to look at his face. What he saw made his blood run cold. The same angular jawline that greeted him in the mirror each morning, the same deep-set hazel eyes that had been passed down through generations of Sterlings. And there, unmistakable, the distinctive arch of the left eyebrow, a genetic quirk, so unique that family legend claimed it dated back to a 17th century ancestor. "Mason." Autumn's voice cut through his thoughts as she hurried across the lawn. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry. He's just playing pretend. You know how children are." Her words tumbled out too quickly, her eyes wide with unmistakable fear. But Thaddeus barely heard her. His gaze remained fixed on the boy, Mason, who was now looking between the two adults with confusion darkening his features. "Did I do something wrong, Mummy?" Mason asked, his small voice uncertain. Thaddeus straightened, feeling as though the ground beneath him had shifted. The migraine that had driven him home early now pulsed with renewed intensity behind his eyes. 6 years ago. His mind calculated automatically. 6 years ago, when Lorelei had been away in Tokyo for 3 weeks. When he'd drowned his loneliness in expensive scotch night after night. "No, sweetheart," Autumn answered, pulling Mason to her side. "Mr. Sterling is just surprised to see us out here, that's all." Thaddeus met Autumn's gaze, saw the silent plea there, and the confirmation of what he'd already understood. His world, so carefully constructed, so rigidly controlled, had just shattered beneath his feet. "We should talk," he said, his voice barely audible over the gentle splashing of the fountain. Autumn nodded, once her face pale. "Mason, go inside and find Mrs. Hayes in the kitchen. I bet she has cookies waiting." As Mason raced toward the house, Thaddeus watched him go, the boy's departing words still hanging in the air between them. "Daddy," the word that would change everything. Thaddeus led Autumn to his private study, a room few staff members ever entered. Dark mahogany bookshelves lined the walls, housing leather-bound classics he seldom read, but collected obsessively. It was like much of his life, meticulously curated, for appearance. He closed the heavy door behind them, sealing them in silence. For a moment neither spoke. Autumn stood rigidly by the door, her hands clasped tightly before her knuckles white with tension. The afternoon light streamed through the bay windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air between them. "How long have you worked for me, Autumn?" Thaddeus finally asked, moving to stand behind his desk. It was an unnecessary question. He knew the answer precisely, but it provided an entry point to a conversation he wasn't sure how to begin. 8 years this October, sir." Her voice was steady despite her evident anxiety. "And Mason is—" He let the question hang incomplete. "He'll be 6 in January." She met his gaze directly now, chin tilted slightly upward. There was dignity in her posture, a quiet defiance that hadn't been there moments before in the garden. Thaddeus's hands curled around the back of his leather chair. January. Another mental calculation. 9 months after that night, yes. Autumn completed his thought, saving him from having to articulate it. After Miss Lorelei was in Tokyo, and you had been drinking. The memory long buried surfaced with uncomfortable clarity. A stormy April night, lightning cracking the sky outside. Autumn, finding him in this very study, slumped over his desk, an empty decanter beside him. Her concern as she helped him upstairs, his unexpected vulnerability, his hand catching hers as she turned to leave his bedroom. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question emerged harsher than he'd intended, edged with the sting of betrayal. Autumn's laugh was brittle. "Tell you the man who signs my paychecks, the husband of a woman who could destroy my career with a phone call. What exactly should I have said, Mr. Sterling?" "The truth would have been a start," he retorted, anger flaring. "The truth," she echoed, the word hollow. "I tried to tell you once, when I realized I was pregnant. I came to this office, stood exactly where I'm standing now, and waited while you took conference calls for 2 hours. When you finally acknowledged me, you were irritated at the interruption. You asked if it could wait until tomorrow." Thaddeus frowned, searching his memory. "I don't remember that. Why would you?" "It was a Tuesday, probably one of 100 identical Tuesdays in your life." The bitterness in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. "I decided then that it could wait forever, that it should wait forever." Thaddeus moved around the desk, coming closer. "So what changed? Why is Mason suddenly calling me Daddy?" Autumn's composure cracked slightly, her eyes glistening. "That wasn't supposed to happen. He's been asking about his father more lately. I've always told him his father was someone I knew before I came to work here, someone who moved away before he was born. But Mason is observant. He sees things. Like what? Like photographs of you in magazines I keep around the apartment. Like the way your eyes crinkle at the corners when you smile. Just like his do. Last week he pointed at a picture of you in some business publication and said, 'Mommy, that man looks like me.' She took a deep breath. I panicked. I told him he was imagining things, but children see connections adults try to hide." Thaddeus turned away, moving to the window. Outside, the perfect gardens of his estate stretched toward the horizon, manicured and controlled, nothing like the wild tangle his life had suddenly become. "Does anyone else know?" he asked, his back to her. "No one. I've been careful." "And you're certain that I'm—" "There's been no one else," Autumn said quietly. "Ever." The weight of her words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Thaddeus pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window, closing his eyes briefly. "I'll need to verify this," he said, the businessman in him taking over, seeking facts, data certainty. "I understand." Her voice was small now. What do you intend to do?" He turned back to face her, seeing not his housekeeper but the mother of his child, a woman who had carried this secret alone for years. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "This changes everything, Autumn." "No, that's why I never told you." She hesitated, then asked, "Are you going to fire me?" The question surprised him. "Is that what you're worried about?" I have a child to support. Your child. There was no accusation in her tone, just the simple statement of fact. I won't fire you. Thaddeus ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of dishevelment from a man known for his composure. But I need time to think, and I need proof. DNA testing, she nodded. I expected as much. It's not that I don't believe you, he began, but she raised a hand to stop him. You built an empire on verification and facts, Mr. Sterling. I'd be surprised if you didn't want proof. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. For what it's worth, I never planned to disrupt your life. I never wanted anything from you. Except the truth, Thaddeus said quietly. Autumn's smile was sad. The truth has a way of emerging whether we want it to or not, like water finding cracks in a foundation. As she left, Thaddeus remained standing by the window, watching the lengthening shadows across his perfect lawn. In the distance he could see Mason now playing with the gardener's dog, his small figure darting across the green expanse. His son. The words felt foreign, like a language he'd never learned to speak. Yet somehow, looking at the boy's distinctive movements, Thaddeus knew with a certainty that transcended DNA tests that Mason carried his blood. And someone else knew it too. As he watched, Thaddeus spotted a familiar figure observing Mason from the terrace, his brother Reed, his expression unreadable even from this distance. A chill passed through Thaddeus that had nothing to do with the air-conditioned room. If anyone could recognize a Sterling when they saw one, it would be Reed. And if there was anyone who would use this information against him, it would also be Reed. 3 days later, Thaddeus sat in his home office, staring at the email that had just arrived. The cursor hovered over the attachment, his finger suspended above the mouse button. One click would reveal the scientific truth of what his instincts already confirmed. Outside, rain pelted against the windows, mirroring the storm raging within him. He hadn't slept properly since the encounter in the garden his nights spent watching. The ceiling as his mind replayed years of missed moments. Mason's first steps, first words, first day of school, all lost to him. He clicked. The document opened with clinical detachment pages of scientific terminology, leading to a simple conclusion, highlighted in bold, probability of paternity 99.9998%. Thaddeus exhaled slowly the breath he'd been holding, escaping in a long, controlled stream. Confirmation brought no shock, only a strange sense of completion, as if a puzzle piece long missing had finally slid into place. His phone buzzed. Lorelei. His third missed call today. He'd been avoiding her, making excuses about late meetings and early departures. How could he face her while carrying this secret? Their marriage, 15 years of carefully maintained appearances and mutual ambition, now seemed like an elaborate stage set, ready to collapse at the slightest touch. When had they last truly connected? Thaddeus couldn't remember. Their lives had diverged years ago into parallel lanes of success and social status, intersecting only when convenient or necessary. They were partners in an enterprise called marriage shareholders, rather than lovers. The phone stopped buzzing. In the sudden silence, Thaddeus made a decision. Standing abruptly, he grabbed his keys and headed for the garage, bypassing his usual driver. This was one journey he needed to make alone. 30 minutes later, he parked across from a modest apartment complex on the city's east side. From his Bentley, he watched as residents came and went, umbrellas bobbing in the rain. He'd never visited Autumn's home before, had never considered where she lived when not maintaining his mansion. The address had been in her personnel file, one of dozens he'd reviewed when he'd ordered the discreet DNA testing. Movement caught his eye. Autumn emerged from the building entrance holding Mason's hand. The boy wore a bright yellow raincoat and matching boots, jumping enthusiastically into each puddle they passed. Autumn's expression was patient, tired, but smiling at her son's joy in simple pleasures. Thaddeus sank lower in his seat, feeling like an intruder. They approached a small sedan, and he watched as Autumn helped Mason into a booster seat, carefully checking the straps before closing the door and circling to the driver's side. As they drove away, Thaddeus followed at a distance, curious about the life his son lived when not at the Blackwood estate. The sedan eventually pulled into the parking lot of a community center. Through the rain-streaked windshield, Thaddeus observed, as Autumn and Mason hurried inside, joining other parents and children, arriving for what appeared to be an evening activity. Finding a spot where he could see the entrance, Thaddeus waited. 20 minutes later, he slipped inside, following the sound of children's voices to a large room where a karate class was underway. From the doorway, he watched as a dozen children, in white uniforms, practiced basic moves under an instructor's guidance. Mason stood in the second row, his face a mask of concentration as he mirrored the instructor's movements. The boy's determination was evident in every precise gesture, his small body tensed with effort. Thaddeus recognized that focused expression. It was the same one he wore during crucial negotiations. "He's been taking classes for 6 months now." Autumn's voice beside him made Thaddeus start. She'd spotted him from where she sat with other parents. He asked for lessons after watching a martial arts movie. Said he wanted to be strong and brave. Thaddeus continued watching Mason. "He's good. He's persistent. Practices every day without being reminded." Pride colored her voice. "The instructor says he has unusual discipline for his age." Another inherited trait, Thaddeus thought. His own single-minded focus had built Sterling Enterprises from a modest tech startup to an international powerhouse. "I got the results," he said quietly, still watching Mason. Autumn nodded. "I assumed you would come when you did." They stood, in silence for a moment, united in observation of their child. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "I don't know," Thaddeus admitted. The ruthless decision-maker, the CEO, known for swift and confident action, found himself adrift in unfamiliar waters. "I need to tell Lorelei." Autumn tensed beside him. "And then—" "Then—" He trailed off, uncertain. "Mason deserves to know who I am, who we are to each other. It will change his life," she warned. "Change all our lives." "It already has," Thaddeus replied. The class ended and children began running to waiting parents. Mason spotted Autumn and raced over, stopping short when he recognized Thaddeus. "Hello, Mr. Sterling," he said with unexpected formality, executing a small bow like he'd just been practicing. "Hello, Mason," Thaddeus responded, fighting a sudden tightness in his throat. "That was impressive work out there." The boy's face brightened. "Really, I'm getting my yellow belt soon." "I believe it," Thaddeus said, finding himself genuinely smiling, for the first time in days. An awkward moment followed the three of them standing in a triangle of unspoken connections. Finally, Autumn touched Mason's shoulder. "Go change, sweetheart. We need to get home for dinner." As Mason darted off to the changing rooms, Autumn turned to Thaddeus. "He has your smile. I've always thought so." Something in her tone made Thaddeus look at her more closely. Not for the first time, he was struck by how little he knew this woman who had worked in his home for years, who had raised his child in silence. "Would you—" he began, then hesitated. "Could I join you both for dinner somewhere nice? I'd like to spend some time with him. With both of you." Surprise registered on Autumn's face, followed by wariness. "Is that wise people might recognize you?" "Let them," Thaddeus said with sudden decisiveness. "I'm tired of hiding from a truth I didn't know existed." Autumn studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "There's a pizza place near our apartment. Nothing fancy, but it's Mason's favorite." "Pizza sounds perfect," Thaddeus said, realizing he meant it. As they waited for Mason, Thaddeus felt his phone vibrate again in his pocket. Lorelei's name flashed on the screen. With a small hesitation, he declined the call. Across town, in the Blackwood mansion, Lorelei Sterling stared at her phone in frustration. Beside her stood Reed Sterling, his expression unreadable as he swirled amber liquid in a crystal tumbler. "He's avoiding you," Reed observed coolly. "He's busy," Lorelei countered, but doubt shadowed her eyes. Reed's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Is that what we're calling it now? Funny, I saw him earlier today and he didn't look busy at all. In fact, he looked quite preoccupied with family matters." "What are you talking about?" Lorelei demanded. Reed took a deliberate sip of his drink before answering. "Have you ever really looked at Autumn's son, Lorelei? I mean, really looked at him?" The blood drained from Lorelei's face as Reed pulled out his phone and showed her a photo he'd taken surreptitiously days before. Mason playing in the garden, his profile a miniature echo of Thaddeus's. Interesting resemblance, wouldn't you say? Reed's voice was soft with satisfaction. The board meeting's next week. I wonder how our conservative investors would react to knowing their esteemed CEO has been hiding a secret child all these years. Lorelei's fingers tightened around her phone, her knuckles whitening. What do you want, Reed? His smile widened. What I've always wanted, dear sister-in-law. What's rightfully mine. The pizza restaurant buzzed with Friday evening activity. Families gathered around tables, teenagers clustered in booths, the air rich with the scent of tomato sauce and baking dough. In a corner booth, Thaddeus Sterling sat across from Mason, watching, in mild fascination, as the boy meticulously removed each piece of pineapple from his Hawaiian pizza. "I don't like pineapple?" Thaddeus asked, breaking a silence that had stretched between them. Mason shook his head emphatically. "It's weird on pizza, but Mom always forgets." "I don't forget," Autumn corrected gently, napkin in hand, as she wiped sauce from Mason's chin. "I live in hope that someday you'll try it and discover you like it." "Never," Mason declared with the absolute certainty only children can muster. Thaddeus smiled, struck by an unexpected memory. "I was the same way. About olives when I was your age. Couldn't stand them. My mother would hide them in my food, thinking I wouldn't notice." "Did you?" Mason asked, suddenly interested. "Every time. I'd line them up at the edge of my plate like little soldiers being punished." The memory surprised Thaddeus. He rarely thought about his childhood, rarely spoke of his mother who had died when he was 12. Mason giggled, then proceeded to arrange his discarded pineapple pieces in a similar formation along his plate's edge. The gesture, so unconsciously mirroring Thaddeus's own childhood habit, created a strange tightness in his chest. Autumn observed the interaction quietly, her eyes moving between father and son with a complex mixture of emotions. This was the first time she'd ever seen them together, engaged in actual conversation. The similarities between them went beyond physical appearance, the same tilted head when listening, the same precision in small movements. "Mason," she said carefully, "why don't you tell Mr. Sterling about your science project?" The boy's face lit up. "We're building solar systems. Mine has all the planets, even the dwarf ones that don't count anymore. My teacher said it was the most detailed one in class." "That's impressive," Thaddeus said genuinely. "I was always fascinated by astronomy as their boy." "Really?" Mason's eyes widened. "Mom got me a telescope for Christmas, but we can't see much from our apartment." Before Thaddeus could respond, a young woman approached their table, her expression uncertain. "Excuse me, aren't you Thaddeus Sterling?" she asked, smartphone already half raised for a potential photo. The easy atmosphere at the table instantly evaporated. Autumn tensed instinctively, shifting closer to Mason, while Thaddeus straightened his public persona, sliding into place like armor. "I am," he acknowledged, his voice cooler than it had been moments before. "Could I possibly get a quick photo? My boyfriend works in tech and he's such a huge admirer of your work with Sterling Enterprises." Thaddeus glanced at Autumn and Mason, making a split-second decision. "I'm having a private dinner with friends. Right now, I hope you understand." The woman flushed with embarrassment. "Of course, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Enjoy your evening." She retreated quickly, but not before several nearby diners had noticed the exchange heads turning with newfound interest toward their corner booth. "Perhaps we should go," Autumn suggested quietly, already reaching for her purse. Thaddeus nodded, signaling for the check. As they waited, Mason looked up at him with curiosity. "Are you famous?" he asked. Thaddeus considered the question more seriously than he might have expected. "Some people know who I am because of my company, but that doesn't make me special, Mason. It just means I have a job that puts me in the public eye sometimes." The boy seemed to ponder this. "Like a movie star. More like a businessman who sometimes appears in financial news," Thaddeus clarified, smiling slightly. "Much more boring than a movie star." Outside the restaurant, the evening air had cooled, the earlier rain leaving the pavement shining under streetlights. Autumn took Mason's hand automatically as they walked toward the parking lot. "I had a nice time," Thaddeus said, surprising himself with the sincerity of the statement. "Thank you for allowing me to join you." Autumn nodded, her expression guarded. "What happens next, Thaddeus?" It was the first time she'd used his first name, the formality of their employer-employee relationship momentarily set aside. Thaddeus looked down at Mason, who was busy jumping between puddle reflections, oblivious to the adult tension. I'd like to spend more time with him, get to know him better. And Lorelei, the company. Your life doesn't exactly have space for— I'll make space. Thaddeus interrupted, a new determination in his voice. I've missed 5 years already. I don't intend to miss any more. Autumn studied his face, searching for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or resolve. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, as she nodded slowly. Mason, she called, come say goodbye to Mr. Sterling. The boy bounded over, slightly breathless from his puddle-jumping expedition. Bye, Mr. Sterling. Thanks for pizza. Without thinking, Thaddeus crouched to Mason's level, meeting his eyes directly. You can call me Thaddeus if you'd like, Mason, and maybe we could do this again sometime. Mason's face brightened. Can we go to the Science Museum? They have a planetarium with all the constellations. I think that could be arranged, Thaddeus agreed, feeling something unfamiliar and warm expand in his chest. As he watched them drive away, Thaddeus remained, standing in the parking lot, postponing the inevitable return to his other life. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Lorelei again, the 7th call today. With a sigh, he finally answered, Where are you? Her voice was tight with barely contained anger. I've been calling for hours. I had a business dinner. The lie came easily. Years of emotional distance making deceit simpler than it should have been. With whom? The directness of the question caught him off guard. A potential client. Why the interrogation, Lorelei? A pause, then. Reed stopped by. He seems to think you've been distracted lately. The mention of his brother sent a chill through Thaddeus. Reed should mind his own business. He is minding his business, Lorelei replied, her tone shifting to something harder. Sterling Enterprises is as much his as it is yours, even if you've always treated him like a junior partner. Thaddeus pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a headache forming. We'll discuss this when I get home. Yes, Lorelei agreed, her voice suddenly cold. We certainly will. As he ended the call, Thaddeus glanced back at the restaurant where for a brief hour he'd experienced a glimpse of a different life. Simpler, warmer, unscripted. The contrast with what awaited him at home couldn't have been starker. In the shadows of a car parked across the street, a camera lens captured Thaddeus's contemplative expression as he stood alone in the rain-slicked parking lot. The photographer smiled, reviewing the images of Thaddeus, Autumn, and Mason at dinner. Reed Sterling would pay handsomely for these particular photographs, evidence of the secret that could bring his brother's carefully constructed empire crashing down. Reed Sterling's office occupied the floor directly below his brother's at Sterling Enterprises headquarters, a daily reminder of the hierarchy that had defined their relationship since childhood. Where Thaddeus's office was minimalist, and modern Reed favored dark woods and leather, creating an atmosphere of old money power that belied the company's cutting-edge technology focus. On this particular Monday morning, Reed sat behind his mahogany desk examining the photographs spread before him. Each captured a moment from Friday evening, Thaddeus entering the pizza restaurant with Autumn and Mason, the three of them, at their table, laughing, Thaddeus crouching to speak with Mason in the parking lot, their profiles side by side, the resemblance unmistakable. A knock at the door interrupted his contemplation. Come in, Reed called quickly, gathering the photos into a folder. Vanessa Chen, Sterling Enterprises Chief Financial Officer, entered with a tablet in hand. The quarterly projections you asked for, she said, placing the device on his desk. Her sharp eyes caught the edge of a photograph peeking from the folder. New acquisition target. Reed smiled thinly. Something like that. He tapped the folder thoughtfully. Vanessa, you've worked with my brother for, 8 years now? 9 next month, she corrected, her expression professionally neutral. And in all that time, has he ever mentioned having family concerns outside of Lorelei? Vanessa's eyebrow arched slightly. Is there a specific reason for this line of questioning, Reed? Curiosity. He leaned back in his chair. The board meeting's coming up, and I'm concerned about Thaddeus's focus lately. He seems distracted. Your brother has always been the picture of concentration, Vanessa replied carefully. If he's distracted, I haven't noticed. Reed nodded, dismissing her with a wave. After she left, he reopened the folder, lifting the clearest image, Mason. Looking up at Thaddeus, their matching profiles captured in perfect relief. The resemblance was undeniable to anyone who knew where to look, and Reed had been looking for years. Since childhood, he'd lived in Thaddeus's shadow, the younger brother, always a step behind, always compared and found wanting. Their father had groomed Thaddeus from birth to take over Sterling Enterprises, treating Reed as the backup plan. The insurance policy, should anything happen to the golden child. Nothing ever had. Thaddeus had excelled at everything: academics, athletics, business acumen. He'd married strategically formed powerful alliances and positioned himself as the untouchable king of their corporate kingdom. Until now. Reed traced Mason's face in the photograph with one finger. The boy was living proof of Thaddeus's imperfection, concrete evidence that the great Thaddeus Sterling was as fallible as anyone else. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Sterling, your brother is asking to see you." Reed smiled, sliding the folder into his desk drawer. "Send him in." Thaddeus entered, impeccable as always in a tailored navy suit, but Reed immediately noticed the shadows beneath his eyes, the slight tightness around his mouth that betrayed stress. "Brother," Reed greeted, gesturing to a chair. "To what do I owe this honor? You rarely descend from your lofty perch to visit my humble domain." Thaddeus remained standing. "Cut the theatrics, Reed. I want to know why you were at my house on Friday evening, filling my wife's head with insinuations." Reed affected a look of innocence. "Insinuations? I simply stopped by to discuss the Anderson merger with you. When you weren't there, Lorelei and I had a pleasant chat. That's hardly a crime." "What exactly did you say to her?" Reed stood moving to the bar cart in the corner of his office. "Drink? You look like you could use one." "It's 10 a.m. "It's never stopped you before," Reed remarked casually, pouring himself a small measure of scotch. "When the mood strikes, as I recall." The pointed reference to Thaddeus's occasional overindulgence, the very behavior that had led to his night with Autumn, didn't go unnoticed. Thaddeus's eyes narrowed. "Whatever game you're playing, Reed, I suggest you stop now." Reed sipped his drink, studying his brother over the rim of the glass. "No game, Thaddeus. Just an observation that you've seemed preoccupied lately. The board is noticing. Our shareholders might start noticing too." "Is that a threat? A concern?" Reed corrected smoothly. "Family concerns, one might say." The emphasis on family hung in the air between them. Thaddeus's expression remained impassive, but Reed knew his brother well enough to recognize the slight clench of his jaw, a tell from childhood that indicated suppressed anger. "The board meeting is in 3 days, Thaddeus said flatly. "I expect your full support on the expansion proposal." Reed inclined his head in mock deference. "Of course, we're family after all. Families should always support each other, don't you think? No matter what unexpected developments might arise." For a moment, Thaddeus simply stared at his brother, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his features. Then, without another word, he turned and left the door closing firmly behind him. Reed returned to his desk, retrieving the folder of photographs. His brother's reaction had confirmed what he'd already suspected Thaddeus knew about Mason. The question now was how to use this knowledge most effectively. The company bylaws, drafted by their conservative father, contained a morality clause that gave the board power to remove any executive whose personal conduct might bring disrepute to the Sterling name. An illegitimate child concealed for years certainly qualified, especially when the mother was a household employee. But timing was everything. Reed needed to ensure the board would turn to him as the natural successor when Thaddeus fell. That required careful positioning, strategic information release, and absolute certainty. Picking up his phone, Reed dialed a number known to few. "I need more information," he said when the call connected. "Everything you can find on Autumn Walsh and her son Mason, school records, medical history, financial transactions, and I need it before Thursday's board meeting." Hanging up, Reed swirled the remaining scotch in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. He'd waited years for a weakness in his brother's perfect facade. Now that he'd found one, he intended to exploit it fully. Across town, Thaddeus sat in his parked car outside Mason's elementary school, hands gripping the steering wheel as he struggled to regain his composure. Reed knew or at least suspected strongly enough to make thinly veiled threats. The carefully controlled separation between his worlds was beginning to crumble. Through the windshield he watched as children spilled from the building for recess, their carefree shouts filling the air. He spotted Mason easily among them, the boy's distinctive features like a beacon to eyes now trained to recognize them. As Mason ran to join a group of children at the playground, Thaddeus was struck by the normalcy of the scene, his son living an ordinary life unaware of the storm gathering around him. His phone chimed with a message from Autumn. "Are you sure? About this meeting him at school seems risky." Thaddeus typed back, "I need to see him just for a few minutes." The reply came quickly, "He'll be excited, but people will notice you." Thaddeus looked at himself in the rearview mirror, the face known to business publications and technology conferences around the world. A face now inextricably linked to the small boy playing soccer on the field beyond. "Let them notice," he responded, making a decision that would set in motion events beyond his control. Pocketing his phone, Thaddeus stepped out of the car and walked toward the school fence, each step carrying him further from the life he'd known and closer to the one he was only beginning to discover. From across the street, another camera captured his approach, another set of images that would soon find their way to Reed's growing file of evidence. The game had begun in earnest. The Sterling mansion had never felt so silent. Thaddeus stood in the cavernous foyer, listening to the hollow echo of the massive front door closing behind him. The space, designed to impress with its soaring ceilings and marble floors, suddenly seemed cold and impersonal, a showpiece rather than a home. "You're late." Lorelei's voice floated down from the curved staircase. She descended slowly, each step deliberate, her silk evening gown rustling softly. They had a charity gala tonight, an event circled in red on their shared calendar for months. "I had a meeting that ran long," Thaddeus replied, loosening his tie. "With whom?" The question was pointed direct. "Investors for the Asian expansion." Another lie, another brick in the wall growing between them. In truth, he'd spent the afternoon at a park with Mason, watching the boy feed ducks and explain the intricate rules of a game he'd invented involving fallen leaves and wind patterns. Lorelei reached the bottom of the stairs, studying him with cool detachment. Her beauty remained striking. Platinum blonde hair swept into an elegant updo, features sculpted to perfection, body maintained with rigorous discipline. They made a formidable couple in public, the power duo of Sterling Enterprises. But in private they'd become strangers, occupying the same luxurious prison. "You need to change," she said, glancing at her diamond watch. "We're expected at the Whitmore Foundation in 40 minutes. Thaddeus hesitated. "About that, I'm not sure I can make it tonight. The meeting raised some concerns that I need to address." Immediately, her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "This is the third event you've missed this month. People are beginning to talk." "Let them talk. Is that your new philosophy?" Lorelei moved closer, her perfume, an exclusive scent created just for her, enveloping him like a beautiful, suffocating cloud. "Because it seems to extend beyond social obligations. Reed mentioned seeing you at Westlake Elementary yesterday. Curious location for an investor meeting." Thaddeus felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "You're having Reed follow me now." "He wasn't following you. He was meeting with the principal about a technology donation program." Her gaze was unwavering. "The question is, why were you there?" The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken accusations. Thaddeus could continue the charade manufacture, another convenient lie, but suddenly the thought exhausted him. "I was visiting Mason," he said simply. If Lorelei was surprised by his honesty, she concealed it masterfully. Only a slight tightening of her fingers around her clutch betrayed any reaction. "Mason," she repeated the name hanging in the air between them. "Autumn's son." "My son too," Thaddeus said quietly. Lorelei laughed, a brittle, humorless sound that echoed in the marble foyer. "So she finally told you? I was wondering when that would happen." The statement hit Thaddeus like a physical blow. "You knew, please." Lorelei walked to the bar cart positioned against the wall, pouring herself a measure of vodka with precise movements. "The resemblance is obvious to anyone. With eyes. I knew the moment I saw him as an infant." Thaddeus struggled to process this revelation. You've known for 6 years and said nothing. What was there to say? She took a deliberate sip her lipstick, leaving a perfect imprint on the crystal glass. That I was aware my husband had been unfaithful with the housekeeper, that there was. A living reminder of that indiscretion running around our property. It seemed more dignified to maintain silence. Dignified, Thaddeus echoed incredulously. A child, my child, has grown up without his father because of your dignity. Don't. You dare make me the villain here. Lorelei snapped the first crack in her perfect composure. You're the one who couldn't keep your pants zipped. You're the one who risked everything we've built for a night with the help. The crude characterization of what had happened with Autumn ignited Thaddeus's anger. Is that how you see her as? The help. She's raised my son single-handedly, while working full-time in our home watching him call another man daddy in some playground, because she thought that's what we wanted. What you wanted, Lorelei corrected coldly. I never asked her to lie. Thaddeus stared at his wife, really seeing her for perhaps the first time in years. What exactly are you saying, Lorelei? She met his gaze unflinchingly. I'm saying that Autumn and I reached an understanding years ago. She kept her job and received generous bonuses. In exchange, she agreed to certain conditions regarding Mason's upbringing. The implications of her statement washed over Thaddeus in a sickening wave. You paid her to keep Mason away from me. I paid her to maintain our privacy and protect Sterling Enterprises from scandal, Lorelei corrected. The company bylaws are quite clear about moral conduct expected of leadership. Your father ensured that. The mention of his father, a stern, unforgiving man whose approval Thaddeus had spent a lifetime seeking, landed with calculated precision. So this has all been about the company, Thaddeus said flatly. It's always been about the company. Everything we do, every decision we make, serves Sterling Enterprises first. Lorelei set down her glass with a sharp click against the marble tabletop. You used to understand that. Thaddeus moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking their manicured grounds. Outside, artificial lights illuminated the garden paths where just weeks ago Mason had called him Daddy and changed his world forever. I'll be moving to the guest suite, he said, his voice distant even to his own ears. I think we both need space to consider what happens next. Lorelei's laugh held no humor. What happens next is you pull yourself together and remember your responsibilities. The board meeting is in 2 days. Reed is circling like a shark smelling blood. And you're jeopardizing everything over some misplaced paternal instinct that suddenly awakened after 6 years of convenient ignorance. Her words struck with the precision of arrows finding vulnerable targets. Thaddeus turned back to face. Her recognizing the skilled negotiator he'd always admired professionally, but rarely encountered in their personal life. Is that how you see Mason as a threat to the company? I see him as a complication we managed successfully until you decided to play daddy. Lorelei's voice had regained its cool control. Reed won't hesitate to use this against you with the board. He's been waiting years for an opportunity like this. Let him try, Thaddeus said, newfound resolve strengthening his voice. I'm done hiding from this, Lorelei. Mason is my son. I intend to acknowledge him publicly and be part of his life. The color drained from Lorelei's perfect features. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything. They stared at each other across the expanse of their immaculate foyer, 15 years of marriage, crystallizing into this pivotal moment of truth. Lorelei broke the silence first. I'll be attending the gala alone then. I'll tell everyone you're ill. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the ornate handle. Think very carefully about your next move, Thaddeus. Once you open this door, it can never be closed again. After she left, Thaddeus remained standing in the window, watching her car disappear down the long driveway. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Oh, well, message from Autumn with a photo attached. Mason grinned at the camera, holding up a drawing of planets orbiting a bright yellow sun. The caption read, "He wanted you to see his science project. First prize." Something warm unfurled in Thaddeus's chest, displacing the cold weight of his confrontation with Lorelei. He typed back a response, "Tell him I'm incredibly proud. We should celebrate this weekend." As he pressed send, Thaddeus felt an unexpected clarity descend. For years he'd pursued success as defined by his father, by the board, by the expectations of others. Now for the first time he was choosing a path based on something deeper and more personal than corporate ambition. Across town, Reed sat in his darkened home office, listening intently to the recording his private investigator had made of Thaddeus's conversation with Lorelei. A smile spread slowly across his features as he heard Thaddeus declare his intention to acknowledge Mason publicly. Perfect, Reed murmured, reaching for his phone. It was time to accelerate his plans. The board wouldn't need to wait until their scheduled meeting to learn about Thaddeus's secret son, and Reed would ensure they heard the story exactly as he wanted it told. Tomorrow, everything would change. The headline blazed across Thaddeus's tablet screen at 5:47 a.m. Tech Titan's secret love child. Sterling Enterprises CEO's double life exposed. Below it, a photograph of Thaddeus crouching beside Mason at the elementary school playground, their matching profiles unmistakable. The article spared no details, naming Autumn explicitly as the household employee with whom Sterling conducted a clandestine affair, and questioning the integrity of a man who hid his own son for years while presenting a facade of moral leadership to investors and employees alike. Thaddeus's phone began ringing immediately. His PR director, then the company's legal counsel, then board members in quick succession. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the two calls that mattered most. The first was to Autumn, who answered on the first ring, her voice tight with distress. "They're outside my apartment building," she said without preamble. "Reporters, photographers. Mason is terrified." "Pack whatever you need for a few days," Thaddeus instructed, already moving toward his closet to dress. "I'm coming to get you both. There's no way in without being seen. I'll handle it. Just be ready in 30 minutes. His second call was to his head of security, arranging for a team to escort Autumn and Mason from their apartment via the service entrance, while a decoy vehicle drew away the waiting press. As he dressed, Thaddeus heard Lorelei enter their bedroom suite for the first time since their confrontation the previous evening. She stood in the doorway, already immaculately styled, despite the early hour, holding her own tablet, displaying the same damning headline. "I warned you," she said simply. Thaddeus continued buttoning his shirt, not sparing her a glance. "Did you know Reed was going to do this?" "I suspected he might. He's been gathering information for weeks." "And you said nothing." Lorelei moved further into the room, setting her tablet on the bed. "Where are you going?" "To get Autumn and Mason. They're being hounded by reporters. And bringing them here seems wise to you, to the epicenter of the storm." Thaddeus finally looked at her, his expression hardened with resolve. "No, I'm taking them somewhere private until this blows over." "It won't blow over, Thaddeus. This isn't a minor scandal that disappears with a well-crafted press release. This strikes at the heart of your leadership credibility. The board is already calling for an emergency meeting." As if to emphasize her point, Thaddeus's phone buzzed again, the board chairman's name flashing on the screen. Again he ignored it. "The board will have to wait," he said, reaching for his jacket. "My son needs me now." Lorelei's laugh was brittle. "Your son? The one you didn't know existed until 2 weeks ago, the one you were perfectly content to ignore for 6 years. That son." Her words struck like physical blows, but Thaddeus refused to show their impact. "So you made sure I didn't know about him. Remember, your little arrangement with Autumn saw to that." "I protected our interests," Lorelei countered. "I did what needed to be done while you carried on in blissful ignorance. Don't you dare put this on me." Thaddeus moved past her toward the door, then paused. "Did you ever want children, Lorelei, our own children?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment, her perfect composure faltered. "We agreed early on that children weren't part of our plan. The company was our priority." "No," Thaddeus corrected quietly. "You decided. I agreed because it seemed to make sense at the time. But I've wondered lately if I missed something essential by accepting that so easily." Lorelei's expression hardened again. "Well, now you have your chance at fatherhood. I hope it's everything you imagined, because it's going to cost you everything else." Thaddeus looked at his wife, this beautiful, ambitious woman he'd chosen as a partner in building his empire. He searched for some glimmer of the connection they'd once shared, some remnant of genuine emotion beneath the polished exterior. He found nothing but cold calculation. "Maybe it's worth the cost," he said finally, and left. 90 minutes later, Thaddeus guided his Range Rover through the gates of his rarely used lake house, a modernist structure of glass and cedar, nestled among pine trees at the water's edge. In the back seat, Mason peered out the window with wide-eyed curiosity while Autumn sat beside him, tension evident in every line of her body. The escape from her apartment building had been executed with military precision, but not before Mason had seen the crowd of shouting strangers with cameras, had heard his name called by unfamiliar voices. The boy had been uncharacteristically quiet during the drive, overwhelmed by events he couldn't possibly understand. "Is this your vacation house?" Mason asked, as they pulled up to the building, his first words since leaving the city. "Something like that," Thaddeus replied, trying to sound casual for the boy's sake. "I don't come here as often as I should." The caretaker had prepared the house on Thaddeus's instructions, stocking the refrigerator and turning on the heating. Inside, floor-to-ceiling windows revealed panoramic views of the lake, morning sunlight dancing across the water's surface. "Wow," Mason breathed momentarily, forgetting his confusion as he pressed his hands against the glass. "You can see everything." Autumn set down their hastily packed bags, her expression guarded, as she took in their surroundings. "How long do we need to stay here?" Thaddeus guided her toward the kitchen, out of Mason's earshot. "A few days at least, until I can address this publicly and the media frenzy dies down." "Address it how?" Autumn's voice held an edge of panic. "Our faces are everywhere, Thaddeus. Mason's school called. They suggested he take a leave of absence. The principal cited concerns from other parents about disruption." The news hit Thaddeus with unexpected force. In his corporate world, he was accustomed to controlling narratives, managing outcomes. But this scandal had already reached beyond his sphere of influence to touch Mason's life directly. "I'll fix this," he promised, though the words sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Autumn's laugh held no humor. "How exactly you can't undo the photos, the speculation. You can't make people forget they've seen your face next to his, noted every similar feature." Her voice broke slightly. "He asked me, in the car, why people were taking his picture, why they were calling him the secret Sterling child. How do I explain that to a 6-year-old? The genuine fear and pain in her eyes cut through Thaddeus's defensive wall. This was his doing. His decision to acknowledge Mason publicly had accelerated events beyond his control. Reed may have lit the match, but Thaddeus had arranged the kindling. His phone vibrated again in his pocket. Glancing at the screen, he saw the board chairman's name for the 4th time that morning. "I have to take this," he said, moving toward the deck. Outside, the crisp air carried the scent of pine and lake water. Thaddeus accepted the call, bracing himself. "Alexander," he greeted the chairman. "Thaddeus." The older man's voice was grave. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. I've been dealing with a family emergency." A pointed silence followed before Alexander continued. "Yes, that's rather the issue at hand, isn't it? The board has called an emergency session for this afternoon. Your presence is required." "I can't be there. My son—" "Your son," Alexander interrupted, "is precisely why this meeting is necessary. The morality clause in the company bylaws is quite clear." "That clause was written in my father's era, Alexander. Times have changed. Perhaps, but our investors' expectations haven't. Sterling Enterprises was built on a reputation of integrity and transparency. This situation calls both into question." Thaddeus gripped the deck railing, watching. A pair of loons glide across the still water. "I made a mistake 6 years ago, yes, but acknowledging and supporting my son isn't something I'll apologize for." "No one is asking you to abandon your responsibilities as a father." Alexander's tone softened slightly. "But the board must consider your responsibilities as CEO. Reed has raised serious concerns about your judgment, your honesty." "Reed engineered this entire scandal," Thaddeus interjected, anger flaring. "He's been gathering information following me taking photographs. He leaked this story to the press precisely to force this board meeting." "That's a serious accusation," Alexander said carefully. "It's the truth, and I can prove it." Inside the house, Mason had discovered the telescope positioned near the windows, aimed toward the night sky. Autumn helped him adjust it their heads, bent together in concentration. The sight stopped Thaddeus mid-sentence. "I'll be at the meeting," he said abruptly. "But I'll be bringing evidence of Reed's involvement in creating this situation. The board should have all the facts before making any decisions." After ending the call, Thaddeus remained on the deck watching Autumn and Mason through the glass. They moved in sync, mother and son a unit, complete without him. Yet Mason kept glancing toward the deck, as if checking that Thaddeus was still there. His phone buzzed yet again. A news alert. Sterling Enterprises stock plummets amid CEO scandal. The empire he'd built, the legacy he'd protected so carefully, was trembling on its foundation. And for what a relationship that barely existed with a child who barely knew him. As if sensing his thoughts, Mason waved enthusiastically through the window, pointing at the telescope with excitement. Thaddeus waved back, feeling something shift. Inside him, priorities realigning, values clarifying. The company could be saved, stock prices could recover, his reputation might be repaired with time and strategic action. But this moment with his son, this couldn't wait, wouldn't wait, not anymore. With newfound resolve, Thaddeus returned inside to join them, the board meeting temporarily relegated to a secondary concern. Whatever happened this afternoon, he would face it knowing exactly what and who he was fighting for. By midday, the Haixi story had evolved from business scandal to full-blown media sensation. Mason's elementary school principal held an impromptu press conference denouncing the invasive presence of reporters disrupting our learning environment, while inadvertently providing additional fodder by confirming Mason's academic excellence and remarkable resemblance to Mr. Sterling. Thaddeus monitored the coverage from his laptop at the lake house, jaw tightening, as financial news channels debated the Sterling succession crisis with barely concealed relish. Analysts speculated about the company's future, with several suggesting Reed Sterling as the natural successor should the board invoke the morality clause. "They're acting like you've committed a crime," Autumn said, watching over his shoulder, as a panel of experts dissected Thaddeus's personal life. "In my father's worldview I have," Thaddeus replied, closing the laptop. "Sterling Enterprises was built on his puritanical values, the same values embedded in our corporate bylaws. The same values that would punish a child for existing," Autumn noted bitterly. Thaddeus turned to her, really seeing her for perhaps the first time. Not as his housekeeper, not as Mason's mother, but as a woman who had navigated impossible circumstances with quiet dignity for years. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for all of this, for putting you and Mason in this position." Autumn's expression softened slightly. "You didn't leak the story." "No, but I set events in motion by insisting on acknowledging Mason publicly. I should have been more careful, more strategic." "More secretive, you mean?" There was no accusation in her tone, just weary understanding. From the living room came the sound of Mason laughing at a cartoon he'd discovered on the lake house's television. The normality of the sound amid such chaos struck Thaddeus forcefully. "How is he doing?" he asked. Autumn sighed. "He's confused, scared, but children are remarkably resilient. He keeps asking when we can go home, when he can go back to school." She hesitated, then added, "He also asked if you're really his father." The words hit Thaddeus with unexpected force. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that you are his father, that you didn't know about him until recently, and that you want to be part of his life now." Autumn met his gaze directly. "Was I wrong to say that last part?" "No," Thaddeus answered immediately. "That's exactly what I want." The simplicity of his response seemed to surprise her. For a moment something unspoken passed between them, a shared purpose transcending the complications of their history. Thaddeus's phone interrupted the moment. His assistant's name flashed on the screen. "I need to take this." "The board meeting. Fears in 2 hours." While Autumn joined Mason in the living room, Thaddeus accepted the call, listening as his assistant outlined the situation at Sterling Enterprises. "Reed's been meeting privately with board members all morning," she reported. And Lorelei issued a statement expressing her shock and disappointment while requesting privacy. She what? Thaddeus felt a surge of betrayal. Forward me the statement. Moments later, he was reading Lorelei's carefully crafted words portraying herself as the wounded party blindsided by revelations about my husband's secret life. The calculated victimhood narrative was designed to distance herself from any fallout while positioning her as the sympathetic figure in the drama. "Sir?" His assistant's voice pulled him back. "There's something else. A reporter is claiming to have information about an arrangement between Ms. Sterling and Ms. Walsh, something about regular payments dating back years." Thaddeus's blood ran cold. Someone had uncovered Lorelei's payoffs to Autumn. If that information went public, it would transform the narrative entirely, potentially implicating Lorelei in concealing Mason's existence. Under normal circumstances, Thaddeus might have felt vindication at the prospect of Lorelei facing consequences for her actions. But the exposure would inevitably draw Mason further into the scandal, painting him as a pawn in an adult power struggle. The thought was intolerable. Find out which reporter and what outlet, Thaddeus instructed. Then coordinate with legal to issue a cease and desist. Cite privacy concerns for a minor. After ending the call, Thaddeus stood at the lake house, windows watching ripples spread across the water's surface from a distant boat. Each action created reactions beyond his control, expanding outward in unpredictable patterns. The board meeting loomed a confrontation he couldn't avoid. Reed would come armed with evidence, righteous indignation, and the scent of victory. The path of least resistance would be resignation, stepping down to protect what remained of the company's reputation. It would be the corporate world's definition of the honorable thing. But as Mason's laughter floated from the other room, Thaddeus recognized another definition of honor taking shape within him. One that had nothing to do with stock prices or board votes, and everything to do with the child who shared his blood. With sudden clarity, Thaddeus knew what he needed to do. Opening his laptop, he began drafting 2 documents, a personal statement for public release and a presentation for the board meeting that would determine his future. In the living room, unaware of the storms gathering on multiple horizons, Mason explained the cartoon's plot to Autumn with animated enthusiasm. His world had been upended, yet here he was finding joy in a simple moment. Thaddeus watched from the doorway, struck by his son's resilience. Whatever came next, he would face it with the same strength. By early afternoon, dressed in a fresh suit, delivered by his assistant, Thaddeus prepared to depart for the emergency board meeting. He knelt to Mason's level in the lake house entryway. "I have to go to work for a little while," he explained. "But I'll be back tonight, and then maybe we can use that telescope to look at the stars. Would you like that?" Mason nodded, his expression serious. "Are you going to talk to the people with cameras?" The question, so innocently direct, caught Thaddeus off guard. "Some of them, yes. But my job is to make sure they leave you alone. That's the most important thing I'm doing today." Mason considered this, then asked, "Because you're my dad?" Thaddeus felt something catch in his throat. "Yes, Mason. Because I'm your dad, and that's what dads do. They protect their children." The boy's face brightened. "That's what my friend Kevin's dad says too." The simple validation, being grouped with other fathers in Mason's world, affected Thaddeus more deeply than any corporate recognition ever had. As he rose to leave, Autumn approached her, expression concerned. "What will happen at this meeting? Best case, I maintain control of the company with board support. Worst case, I'm ousted and Reed takes over as CEO. And if that happens," Thaddeus glanced at Mason, now back to watching his cartoon, "then I'll have more time for what really matters." Autumn studied him, perhaps searching for insincerity in his words. Finding none, she nodded slightly. "Good luck." The drive back to the city gave Thaddeus time to prepare, mentally reviewing his strategy for the board meeting while dictating final changes to his public statement. As Sterling Tower came into view on the horizon, 60 stories of glass and steel bearing his family name, he felt a strange detachment from the empire he'd spent his life building. Security escorted him through a private entrance, avoiding the press encampment at the main doors. The executive floor was unnaturally quiet, employees having been sent home early due to unusual circumstances, according to the internal memo. Outside the boardroom, his assistant waited with a tablet and a grim expression. They're all inside. Reed arrived 30 minutes ago with a presentation and legal counsel. And Lorelei. She's there too, seated next to Reed. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Taking a deep breath, Thaddeus straightened his tie and entered the lion's den, ready for battle, but uncertain for the first time if victory was what he truly wanted. Principal Edwards of Westlake Elementary considered himself a reasonable man, guided by policy and procedure rather than emotion. But as he faced the Sterling boy's grandmother across his desk, he found his resolve weakening. "Mrs. Walsh, I understand your frustration, but the school board's position is clear," he explained, gesturing to the email printout between them. "Given the current media situation, Mason's presence is creating a disruption that affects other students." Elaine Walsh, a silver-haired woman with the same determined set to her jaw that her daughter Autumn possessed, leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "So my grandson is being punished because his father is famous. Is that the lesson Westlake wants to teach, that children should suffer for circumstances beyond their control?" Principal Edwards shifted uncomfortably. "It's a temporary measure just until the media interest subsides. We're suggesting 3 weeks of remote learning with materials provided by his teacher." 3 weeks. Elaine's voice rose slightly. "Mason is 6 years old. He needs classroom, interaction, routine normalcy, especially now when everything else in his life is in chaos." The principal's intercom buzzed. "Sir, there's a situation at the main entrance. The Sterling boy's mother is here with Mr. Sterling himself." Principal Edwards felt a migraine threatening. Of course, Thaddeus Sterling would choose today to show up personally, the day after the board meeting, that according to news reports had resulted in his temporary leave of absence as CEO. "Tell them I'll be right out," he replied, rising with what he hoped was professional composure. "Mrs. Walsh, if you'd like to join us." The scene at the school's entrance exceeded his worst expectations. A crowd of reporters had gathered on the public sidewalk, beyond the property line cameras raised at the sight of Thaddeus Sterling, standing beside Autumn Walsh at the school gate. Between them, Mason clutched his backpack, wide-eyed at the commotion. Security guards maintained a perimeter, preventing the press from entering school grounds, but nothing could stop the shouted questions. "Mr. Sterling, have you been forced out at Sterling Enterprises?" "Autumn, how long did you keep Mason's paternity?" "Secret." "Mason, look this way, buddy." The last call directed at the child seemed to trigger something in Thaddeus. Principal Edwards watched as the millionaire executive, known for his cool business demeanor, stepped protectively in front of his son, expression hardening into something formidable. Principal Edwards, Thaddeus acknowledged as the administrator, approached. "I understand there's some confusion about Mason's enrollment status. Mr. Sterling, perhaps we should discuss this inside." "No need," Thaddeus interrupted smoothly. "I believe the situation is straightforward. Mason is a registered student at Westlake Elementary. He's done nothing to violate any school policies. Therefore, he will be attending classes today as normal." Principal Edwards glanced nervously at the media circus beyond the gates. "The circumstances are extraordinary. The school board feels—" "The school board," Thaddeus said, voice dropping to a dangerous quietness that somehow carried more weight than a shout, "should be extremely careful about setting precedents for excluding children based on their parents' public profiles. That could be interpreted as discriminatory." The word hung in the air between them, a subtle reminder of potential legal ramifications. Elaine Walsh joined them, putting a supportive hand on Mason's shoulder. "My grandson has perfect attendance so far this year. It would be a shame to break that record over something so trivial as adult drama." Principal Edwards looked between the 3 adults, forming a protective triangle around Mason, recognizing the futility of further resistance. Moreover, despite his professional obligations, he couldn't help feeling a twinge of admiration for their united front. "I'll escort Mason to his classroom personally," he conceded. "But Mr. Sterling, we will need to address the media situation. Perhaps a joint statement from the school and your family would help diffuse some of the interest." Thaddeus nodded, crouching to Mason's level. "Ready for school, buddy?" The boy glanced uncertainly at the reporters, then back to his father. "Will they be here when I get out?" No, Thaddeus promised with firm conviction. I'm going to make sure of that right now. As Principal Edwards led Mason inside, Thaddeus turned toward the gate, approaching the reporters with measured steps. Autumn moved to stop him, but Elaine held her daughter back with a quiet murmur. Let him handle this. It's his mess to clean. Up! The press surged forward as Thaddeus reached the gate, microphones extending toward him like probing instruments. He raised a hand, and to Principal Edwards' surprise, the clamor subsided. I have a brief statement, after which I expect you all to disperse, Thaddeus began, his voice carrying across the suddenly attentive crowd. My son deserves privacy and normalcy. He deserves to attend school without becoming a spectacle. I am asking, no, I am insisting, that you respect his right to a childhood free from your cameras and questions. A bold reporter called out, the public has a right to know about the sterling heir. Thaddeus fixed the man with a gaze so intense that Principal Edwards, watching from several yards away, could almost feel its heat. Mason is a 6-year-old boy, not a sterling heir, Thaddeus responded, the controlled anger in his voice, lending each word weight. If you continue to pursue him, photograph him, or disrupt his education, you will face the full legal consequences that my considerably substantial resources can bring to bear. This is not a negotiation. The stark threat, delivered with such calm certainty, created a ripple of unease through the assembled media. Furthermore, Thaddeus continued, I've instructed my legal team to draft child privacy protection legislation that I will personally lobby state legislators to adopt. Perhaps some good can come from this situation if it leads to better protections for all children from unwarranted media intrusion. With that, Thaddeus stepped back from the gate, returning to where Autumn and Elaine waited. Principal Edwards couldn't hear what passed between them, but the supportive touch Autumn placed on Thaddeus's arm spoke volumes. To the administrator's amazement, the media crowd began to disperse, cameras, lowering reporters, retreating to vans and cars parked along the street. Whether out of respect for Thaddeus's words or fear of his implied legal threats, the effect was immediate and undeniable. Well, Principal Edwards murmured to his assistant as the last reporter departed, I suppose that resolves the disruption concern. Inside the school, Mason settled into his classroom routine, the momentary celebrity status among his peers already fading as the teacher redirected attention to the day's science lesson. Children. Principal Edwards reflected, adapted, with remarkable speed when given the chance. Outside the school building, Thaddeus, Autumn, and Elaine sat in a quiet conference room, discussing next steps with a unity of purpose that transcended the complicated circumstances of their connection. The board has placed me on a 30-day administrative leave, Thaddeus explained, loosening his tie slightly. Reed is interim CEO, though his influence is somewhat limited by the conditions I negotiated. And after 30 days, Autumn asked. Thaddeus's smile held no humor. That depends on whether Reed manages to convince the board to make the arrangement permanent. He's already moved into my office. What about Lorelei? Elaine's question was direct, unvarnished by politeness. A shadow crossed Thaddeus's features. She's made her choice. She's standing with Reed, presenting herself as the wronged wife, while helping him consolidate power. The bitterness in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. For a man accustomed to control, the double betrayal clearly cut deep. Autumn hesitated, then asked, Do you regret it, going public about Mason, knowing what it's cost you? The question hung. In the air between them, waited with implications. Thaddeus looked through the conference room window toward the classroom wing, where his son was now learning among peers, restored to a semblance of normalcy despite the storm surrounding him. No, he said finally, the words simple but firm. I regret the timing, perhaps. I regret not having handled it more strategically, but acknowledging Mason as my son, never. The conviction in his voice seemed to satisfy both women. Elaine nodded, once decisively, as if Thaddeus had passed some unstated test. Well then, she said, rising from her chair, I'd say it's time we figured out what a co-parenting arrangement looks like for Mason. Because press conferences and school gate showdowns are all very dramatic, but that boy needs stability, routine, and adults who put his interests above all else. The practical framing of the challenge ahead grounded Thaddeus, pulling his focus from corporate battles to the more immediate, more meaningful responsibility of fatherhood. "You're right," he acknowledged, "and I'm new to this. I'll need guidance." The admission of inexperience, of vulnerability, clearly surprised Autumn, whose expression softened. "Mason gets out at 3:15, she said simply. "He usually has a snack and then homework before dinner. Perhaps you'd like to be part of that routine today." It was a small offering, yet Thaddeus recognized its significance, a bridge extending across the chasm of their complicated past toward a future centered on their child. "I would," he replied. The mighty CEO of Sterling Enterprises reduced to simple gratitude for a place in his son's ordinary afternoon. As they left the school building, a single photographer who had remained captured the image of the three adults walking together, their expressions reflecting not scandal or shame, but the unmistakable determination of a family unconventional, though it might be united in purpose. Later that evening, as Thaddeus helped Mason with a science worksheet at Autumn's kitchen table, his phone buzzed with a news alert. Sterling Enterprises stock stabilizes as Reed Sterling announces continuity plan. In brother's absence. Thaddeus glanced at the notification, then set the phone aside, returning his attention to Mason's eager explanation of the water cycle. The corporate empire that had once consumed his every waking moment seemed suddenly strikingly remote. Still important, but no longer essential. The worksheet complete, Mason looked up at Thaddeus with a tentative smile. "Are you coming back tomorrow too?" "If it's okay with you and your mom," Thaddeus answered carefully. Mason nodded, considering this with the serious contemplation only. Children can bring to simple questions. "I think it's okay. Kevin says you're supposed to do homework with your dad. He says that's the rules." The casual acceptance, the matter-of-fact inclusion in the pantheon of fathers in Mason's world affected Thaddeus more deeply than any boardroom victory ever had. "Well," he managed, voice suspiciously rough, "we'd better follow the rules then." From the kitchen doorway, Autumn watched the exchange, her expression complex. Concern, hope, and something indefinable that might have been the first fragile seedling of trust. Outside, the media storm continued to swirl. Corporate power hung in. The balance and uncertainties loomed on multiple horizons. But in this small apartment, in this ordinary moment of homework and belonging, Thaddeus Sterling had found an unexpected anchorage in the storm. Not in power, prestige, or position, but in the simple, profound connection to his child. The lakeside property transformed over the next 2 weeks from emergency refuge to something approaching a home. Thaddeus had Mason's bedroom painted his favorite blue, installed a professional-grade telescope on the deck, and converted the boathouse into a science lab, tailored to a 6-year-old's interests and abilities. Autumn initially resisted the move from her apartment, concerned about creating confusion for Mason, but the continued media presence and the practical reality of Thaddeus's administrative leave, leaving him with both time and a desire to be involved in daily parenting, eventually convinced her. "It's temporary," she reminded both Thaddeus and herself as they established a routine that revolved around Mason's school schedule. Just until things calmed down. Yet as October deepened toward November, bringing crisp mornings and flame-colored foliage to the lakeside property, the arrangement began to feel less provisional, more natural. Mason thrived in the spacious environment, racing down to the private dock each afternoon to search for frogs and turtles, filling notebooks with observations that Thaddeus encouraged with scientific references and gentle guidance. On this particular Saturday morning, Thaddeus stood at the kitchen counter preparing breakfast, a skill he'd insisted on learning despite Autumn's initial skepticism. "You've never cooked a meal in your life," she'd challenged when he first proposed taking over breakfast duties. "I've never been a father before either," he'd responded simply. "I'm learning many new skills these days." Now flipping pancakes, with growing confidence while Mason set the table, Thaddeus felt a contentment that his previous life, for all its power and luxury, had never provided. The corporate world continued without him. Reed issued statements about refreshed leadership and forward-looking governance, thinly veiled declarations of a coup completed. Thaddeus monitored developments with professional interest, but decreasing. Personal investment. "Dad, can we take the boat out today?" Mason called from the dining area, the term dad now flowing naturally from his vocabulary after initial weeks of careful navigation between Mr. Sterling and Thaddeus. "If the wind stays calm," Thaddeus replied, sliding perfectly golden pancakes onto serving plates, "we could try fishing near Eagle Point." Autumn entered from the deck, coffee mug in hand. Autumn sunlight highlighting auburn strands in her dark hair. "The forecast says clear skies until evening. Should be perfect boating weather." Something in Thaddeus's chest expanded at the domestic simplicity of the moment. This woman, he was only now truly getting to know this child, who carried his blood, this home that had never felt like one until they filled it with daily life. The doorbell interrupted the moment. Thaddeus glanced at Autumn's surprise reflected in both their expressions. The lakeside property was gated visitors, screened by security Thaddeus had installed after the media frenzy. "Are we expecting someone?" Autumn asked, a note of anxiety returning to her voice, the wariness never fully absent after weeks of press intrusion. "No," Thaddeus answered, moving toward the front of the house. "Stay here with Mason, I'll handle it." Through the security monitor, Thaddeus recognized the visitor with a cold jolt of surprise. Lorelei stood on the front steps, immaculate in a camel coat and designer boots, looking as out of place in the rustic setting as a diamond in garden soil. He opened the door, but remained in the threshold blocking entrance. "Lorelei, this is unexpected." "Clearly," she replied, taking in his casual Saturday attire, jeans and a Henley shirt so different from the bespoke suits of his previous life. "May I come in? It's rather cold out here." After a moment's hesitation, Thaddeus stepped aside, leading her to his home office, rather than the main living area where Autumn and Mason were having breakfast. "What brings you all the way to Lakeside?" he asked, closing the office door. "Reed sent you to deliver paperwork, the board's final decision." Perhaps Lorelei unwound a silk scarf from her neck, her movements precise as always. "The board hasn't made any final decisions yet, though Reed is certainly working to ensure they rule in his favor before your leave ends next week." "I assumed as much." Thaddeus remained standing, making no move to offer her a seat. The woman, before him, his wife in legal terms, still felt like a visitor from another lifetime. "You didn't answer my question. Why are you here?" Lorelei surveyed the office, noting the child's drawings now decorating one wall, the family photos, Thaddeus, Autumn, and Mason at the lake on a hiking trail building a campfire, displayed on the desk. "Playing house seems to suit you." She observed, her tone impossible to read. "It's not playing when it's real, Lorelei." She turned to face him directly. "The divorce papers are ready. My attorney thought personal delivery would be more discreet than having them served at your new family home." The lack of surprise Thaddeus felt confirmed how completely his world had shifted. He accepted the envelope she extended without comment. "Generous terms?" Lorelei continued when he didn't speak. "I have no interest in a public battle. Sign them. Have your lawyer review them if you wish, and this chapter can close quietly." Thaddeus set the envelope on his desk. "And the company. What's your stake in Reed's play for permanent control?" A flicker of something, perhaps genuine emotion, crossed Lorelei's perfect features. "Contrary to what you might believe, I don't hate you, Thaddeus. What Reed is doing. It isn't what I wanted. Yet you stand beside him at board meetings, issue statements supporting his leadership. Politics," she said simply. "Survival, you taught me that." The accusation, subtle but pointed, hung between them. Thaddeus moved to the window overlooking the lake where a pair of kayakers glided across the still morning water. "Did you ever love me, Lorelei? Or was it always about the company, the position, the power?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment her carefully maintained composure wavered. "I loved what we built together," she finally answered. "I loved the partnership, the shared ambition. But love in the romantic sense, I'm not sure either of us truly sought that." The honesty, however clinical, felt refreshing after years of calculated appearances. "And now?" Thaddeus asked, turning back to face her. "What do you want now that our partnership has dissolved?" Lorelei smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her coat. "I want what I've always wanted. Success, security, respect. Without me." "Yes." The single syllable contained neither malice nor sentiment. Our paths diverged the moment you chose to acknowledge Mason publicly, perhaps even before that. A knock at the office door interrupted them. Autumn's voice came through. "Thaddeus Mason's asking for you. The pancakes are getting cold." Lorelei's eyebrow arched slightly at the domestic interruption. "You should go. Family breakfast awaits." Something in her tone, not quite mockery, not quite envy, made Thaddeus study her more carefully. For all her beauty achievement and social position, Lorelei suddenly seemed solitary, in a way he'd never noticed before. "Would you like to meet him?" he asked impulsively. "Mason. He's right outside." Surprise registered on Lorelei's face, followed by an emotion Thaddeus couldn't quite identify. Fear, perhaps, or a more complex discomfort. "I don't think that would be appropriate," she replied, gathering her scarf. "This isn't a social call, Thaddeus." Before he could respond, the office door opened, and Mason peeked in curiosity, overwhelming the injunction to wait. "Dad, Mom says, you need to come now or else—" He stopped short at the sight of Lorelei, eyes widening with recognition. "Oh, you're the lady from the magazines, the one in the pictures with my dad." Thaddeus watched Lorelei, carefully ready to intervene if her response threatened Mason's emotional equilibrium. But to his surprise, her expression softened as she regarded the boy. "Hello, Mason," she said, her voice gentler than Thaddeus had heard in years. "Yes, that's me. I'm Lorelei." "Are you here for pancakes?" Mason asked with a child's directness. "Dad makes them with chocolate chips on Saturdays." A complex emotion crossed Lorelei's face. "That sounds delicious, but I can't stay. I have appointments in the city." "Oh." Mason seemed to process this with a slight frown. "Okay then. But Dad needs to come now because everything's ready." Thaddeus placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. "I'll be right there, buddy. Why don't you go tell your mom I'm coming?" After Mason departed, a weighted silence filled the office. Lorelei adjusted her designer handbag, seeming suddenly eager to leave. "He has your expressions," she said quietly. "The same concentration when he's thinking." "You could have known him all along," Thaddeus responded, the words emerging without premeditation. "If you'd told me the truth when you discovered it." Lorelei met his gaze directly. "We both made choices, Thaddeus. I chose the company. You chose—" She gestured vaguely toward the door. "This. I chose Mason, and I'd make the same choice again." Something resembling respect flickered in Lorelei's eyes. "Then perhaps you've found where you truly belong. Sign the papers, Thaddeus. Free us both to move forward on our separate paths." As she turned to leave, Thaddeus asked one final question. "The arrangement with Autumn, the payments to keep Mason's paternity secret, was that your idea or Reed's?" Lorelei paused at the door. "It was practical, businesslike, a solution to a problem." She hesitated, then added, "But if you're looking for someone to blame for Reed's current actions, that's entirely on me. I underestimated his ambition and overestimated his loyalty." To me, she corrected. "I thought I was using him to protect Sterling Enterprises. It seems he was using me to position himself for a takeover all along." The admission of miscalculation, so rare from the strategically flawless Lorelei, struck Thaddeus as significant. "What will you do now?" he asked, genuine curiosity replacing resentment. Her smile was coolly enigmatic. "Reinvent myself. Isn't that what we Sterlings do best?" With that, she departed, leaving Thaddeus standing in his office with divorce papers in hand and the scent of her exclusive perfume lingering in the air, a ghost from his previous existence. From the kitchen came the sounds of Saturday morning life continuing, Mason's laughter, Autumn's gentle admonition about spilled juice, the domestic symphony so different from the corporate machinery that had once structured his days. Placing the divorce papers in a drawer, Thaddeus returned to the breakfast table where Mason immediately launched into elaborate plans for their boating expedition. Autumn's questioning glance was met with a slight shake of his head, a conversation for later, when small ears weren't present. As he poured maple syrup onto rapidly cooling pancakes, Thaddeus felt the weight of his former life receding further, like a tide pulling away from shore. The corporate kingdom he'd built, the marriage of convenience and ambition, the endless pursuit of market dominance, all fading in significance compared to this table, this moment, this family taking shape despite the unconventional circumstances of its formation. Later, as their small boat glided across the lake's surface, Mason sprawled at the bow, pointing out cloud formations, while Autumn trailed her fingers in the water beside them. Thaddeus experienced a clarity he'd been seeking without knowing it, a deep recognition that the sanctuary they'd created wasn't just a physical place, but a state of being, a choice to value connection over conquest, presence over power. Reed could have the company. Lorelei could have her freedom and reinvention. The board could make whatever judgment they deemed appropriate about his fitness for corporate leadership. Thaddeus had found something far more valuable in the wreckage of his former life, something authentic that no hostile takeover could threaten, no media scandal could tarnish, no corporate bylaw could regulate. As Mason called excitedly about an eagle soaring overhead, Thaddeus exchanged a glance with Autumn, finding in her eyes the same recognition of simple, profound truth. They were exactly where they needed to be. The Sterling Enterprises Conference room, with its sweeping views of the city skyline, had always been Thaddeus's domain, the setting for countless victories, strategic maneuvers, and corporate triumphs. Now seated at the foot, rather than the head of the polished mahogany table, he felt the shift in power dynamics acutely. Reed occupied the chairman's position, flanked by legal counsel and PR directors. Board members filled the remaining seats, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to calculating, as Thaddeus entered for the meeting that would determine his professional fate. Thaddeus, Reed acknowledged, with the satisfaction of a predator who knows its prey is cornered. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice." "Your administrative leave ends tomorrow," Alexander, the board chairman, explained unnecessarily. "This meeting will determine next steps for company leadership." The formal language didn't disguise the reality. This was Reed's coronation ceremony, with Thaddeus invited to witness his own professional execution. "Before we begin," Thaddeus said calmly, setting a folder on the table, "I'd like to distribute some documents for the board's consideration." Reed's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "We have a full agenda already prepared. I'm sure the board would want all relevant information before making decisions about the company's future," Thaddeus interrupted smoothly, sliding copies of the documents toward each member, including evidence of who orchestrated the recent public relations crisis. A ripple of interest moved through the room as board members began reviewing the contents, phone records showing Reed's contact with tabloid journalists, bank transfers to a private investigator, and most damning emails discussing strategy for exposing Thaddeus's secret at the optimal moment for transition. "Where did you get these?" Reed demanded, color rising in his face as he scanned the evidence of his machinations. "Does it matter?" Thaddeus countered. "Their authenticity is easily verifiable. The question is whether the board feels comfortable placing Sterling Enterprises in the hands of someone who would deliberately damage the company's reputation for personal gain." Alexander removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "If these documents are genuine, they raise serious concerns about judgment and ethics." "They're selective and out of context," Reed snapped, struggling to regain control of the narrative. "Thaddeus is attempting to divert attention from his own moral failures." "Having a child is not a moral failure," Thaddeus responded quietly. "Hiding one might be. Weaponizing a child's existence for corporate advancement certainly is." The statement hung in the air, redirecting the moral judgment Reed had sought to harness against his brother. For the next hour, the meeting unfolded like a high-stakes chess match, with Reed fighting to maintain his position, while board members reassessed the situation in light of new information. Thaddeus participated minimally, having said what he came to say, content to let the evidence speak for itself. When the topic finally turned to reinstating Thaddeus as CEO, he raised a hand to pause the discussion. "I appreciate the board's willingness to reconsider," he said, surprising everyone at the table, "but I'm not seeking reinstatement." Reed's expression shifted from defensive to confused. "What game are you playing now?" "No game," Thaddeus replied, meeting his brother's gaze steadily. "The past month has given me perspective I previously lacked. I'm tendering my resignation as CEO effective immediately. Stunned silence followed the announcement. Alexander found his voice first. This is unexpected. May I ask why? Thaddeus looked around the table at the faces of people who had been colleagues but never truly friends in an environment that valued achievement over humanity. My priorities have changed, he said simply. Sterling Enterprises deserves leadership that's fully committed. I've discovered there are aspects of life more deserving of my commitment than quarterly earnings and market share. Reed's laugh held disbelief. You expect us to believe you're walking away from everything you've built for what to play family man at the lake? The dismissive characterization didn't provoke Thaddeus as it once might have. Not playing Reed, being. There's a difference you might understand someday. Before Reed could respond, Thaddeus continued addressing the board. I'm not abandoning my responsibilities to the company. I propose remaining as chairman of the board, providing strategic oversight while stepping back from day-to-day operations. The suggestion created immediate murmurs of consideration. It was a reasonable compromise, maintaining Thaddeus's valuable institutional knowledge while creating distance from the personal scandal. And the CEO position? Alexander asked. I recommend Vanessa Chen, Thaddeus answered promptly. She's been our CFO for 9 years, understands every aspect of our operations, and has the vision to lead Sterling Enterprises into its next phase. The recommendation blindsided Reed, whose assumption that he would naturally ascend to CEO in Thaddeus's absence was suddenly in jeopardy. This is absurd, Reed protested. I've been interim CEO for a month. The transition is already underway. And how has the company performed under your leadership? Thaddeus asked mildly. Our stock is down 8%. 2 major clients have placed contracts on hold. Employee morale has dropped to its lowest point in a decade, according to HR metrics. The factual assessment delivered without emotion landed with precision. Board members exchanged glances, corporate calculus, visibly recalibrating behind their expressions. Alexander cleared his throat. We'll need to deliberate on these recommendations. Perhaps we should continue this discussion after lunch. Before we adjourn, Thaddeus interjected, there's one more matter I'd like to address. He removed a final document from his folder. I've prepared a personal statement regarding my son Mason, which I intend to release to the press today. I wanted the board to see it first as a courtesy. As copies circulated, Thaddeus stood buttoning his suit jacket in a gesture of conclusion. I'll leave you to your deliberations. Whatever the board decides, I wish Sterling Enterprises continued success. With that, he exited the conference room, feeling Reed's furious gaze on his back, but experiencing none of the anxiety that might once have accompanied such a confrontation. In the elevator descending to the lobby, Thaddeus checked his watch. Just enough time to reach the school before Mason's dismissal. Outside Sterling Tower, he nodded to the driver waiting with his car, then changed his mind. I think I'll walk. Today, James, enjoy the afternoon. The 10 blocks to Westlake Elementary took him through the financial district where he'd spent countless hours building his empire past restaurants, where deals had been negotiated over expense account meals. Alongside parks he'd barely noticed in his single-minded pursuit of corporate dominance, now moving at a pedestrian's pace, rather than sealed in a luxury vehicle. Thaddeus observed details previously invisible. The quality of autumn light on glass buildings, the diverse faces of fellow sidewalk travelers, the simple pleasure of physical movement through open space. His phone buzzed with a message from Autumn. How did it go at Sterling? He typed back, better than expected. My choice, not theirs. Will explain when I see you. Another message appeared almost immediately. Alexander. Board voted unanimously. Chen as CEO, you as chairman. Reed suspended pending investigation of evidence presented. Well played. Thaddeus pocketed the phone without responding. The corporate victory, once his primary measure of success, now registered as a secondary consideration. Important, but no longer essential to his sense of self. Approaching Westlake Elementary, he joined other parents gathering at the dismissal area. No reporters remained. The media circus had moved on to fresher scandals, leaving Mason's school life to return to normal routines. When the bell rang and children streamed into the yard, Thaddeus spotted his son immediately. dark hair catching the sunlight, the distinctive sterling profile already evident in his young features, backpack bouncing as he ran toward where Thaddeus waited. "Dad," Mason called, excitement evident in his voice. "We got our science fair assignments today. I'm doing planets." The simple joy in his son's face, the uncomplicated trust in his eyes as he reached for Thaddeus's hand, these were worth more than any corporate kingdom, more valuable than the sterling name emblazoned on buildings across the city skyline. Later that evening, after Mason had gone to bed, Thaddeus sat with Autumn on the deck of the lake house, the night sky scattered with stars visible only away from city lights. His statement had been released to the press hours earlier, a straightforward acknowledgement of Mason as his son, an expression of pride in that relationship, and a request for privacy as their family moved forward. "Do you think it will quiet things down?" Autumn asked, wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill. "For the most part," Thaddeus replied. "People lose interest when there's no conflict to fuel the story. Man acknowledges son loves him, adjusts life accordingly, isn't exactly headline material. And the company." Her question was careful, aware of the complex emotions surrounding his professional identity. Thaddeus considered his response, watching moonlight shimmer across the lake's surface. "It will continue without my daily presence. I'll maintain strategic oversight as chairman, but Vanessa will handle operations. She'll do an excellent job. And Reed." A brief smile touched Thaddeus's mouth. Reed miscalculated. He assumed I'd fight to keep the CEO position at any cost, that my identity was so wrapped up in corporate power that I couldn't imagine existing without it. "Wasn't it, though?" Autumn's question held no judgment, only genuine curiosity. 6 weeks ago, Sterling Enterprises was your entire life. 6 weeks ago, I hadn't held my son's hand walking home from school," Thaddeus answered simply. "I hadn't helped him build a science project, or heard him call me Dad, or watched him sleep knowing that my blood runs in his veins. 6 weeks. Ergo, I was rich in a way that can be measured on balance sheets, but poor in ways I didn't even recognize." Autumn studied him in the dim light, perhaps searching for insincerity in his transformation. Finding none, she asked the question that had hovered between them through weeks of careful co-parenting: "And what happens now with us?" The question encompassed territories both explored and uncharted, their past connection, their present collaboration, their potential future. "That depends," Thaddeus said carefully, "on what you want, Autumn, what we both want beyond providing Mason with stability and love." "And what do you want?" Her voice was soft but direct, unafraid of the answer. Thaddeus turned to face her fully, seeing not the housekeeper who had moved invisibly through his mansion for years, but the woman who had raised his child with quiet courage, who had maintained her dignity through circumstances that would have broken many. "I want to discover if what we're building here is just good co-parenting or something more," he answered honestly. "I want time to know you, not as my employee, not just as Mason's mother, but as yourself. I want to learn if the connection we feel is real or simply the product of extraordinary circumstances." Autumn's smile held a warmth that had been gradually emerging over weeks of shared responsibility and growing trust. "That sounds remarkably like taking things one day at a time. A novel concept for someone who's spent his life with 5-year, strategic plans," Thaddeus acknowledged with a self-deprecating smile. "But yes, exactly that. One day at a time with no predetermined outcome, no corporate merger timeline. I think I can work with those terms," Autumn replied, her hand finding his on the armrest between them. A small connection freely offered more valuable than any contract he'd ever negotiated. Above them, stars wheeled in ancient patterns indifferent to human concerns of wealth status or corporate position. Mason slept peacefully inside, secure, in the knowledge that both his parents loved him and each other, at least enough to build something authentic from the wreckage of secrets too long maintained. And Thaddeus Sterling, once defined by his company and position, discovered that his true legacy might not be the buildings bearing his name across the city skyline, but the quiet moments of connection in this lakeside sanctuary. A different kind, of wealth immeasurable on any balance sheet, but infinitely more satisfying than power ever had been. The Sterling Enterprises boardroom had never felt so tense. Reed Sterling sat rigidly at the conference table, legal counsel, flanking him like sentries, as Vanessa Chen presented the findings of the internal investigation launched after Thaddeus's revelations. "The evidence is conclusive," Vanessa stated, her professional demeanor unfaltering despite the gravity of the situation. Mr. Reed Sterling orchestrated a deliberate campaign to exploit private family information for corporate advantage. He employed a private investigator to follow Mr. Thaddeus Sterling and his family. Vanessa continued sliding documents across the polished table. Phone records confirm Mr. Reed Sterling contacted multiple tabloid journalists the day before the story broke. Financial transactions show payments to a private investigator who surveilled Mr. Sterling, Ms. Walsh, and their minor child without consent. Reed's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests of his chair. "This is a witch hunt orchestrated by my brother to maintain control." "Your brother isn't even in this room," Alexander interrupted the board chairman's usually diplomatic tone, edged with disappointment. "He's at home with his family while you're here facing the consequences of actions that violated not only corporate ethics policies, but potentially several privacy laws." The mention of Thaddeus's absence seemed to further infuriate Reed. In the month since Thaddeus had stepped down as CEO, maintaining only his role as chairman, with limited involvement, Reed had struggled to accept the new reality. His interim leadership had been brief and unsuccessful, culminating in today's reckoning. Sterling Enterprises was built on certain values, Reed argued, desperation creeping into his voice. "My father would never have allowed—" "Your father," Vanessa interjected calmly, "built this company from nothing through innovation and integrity, not through tabloid manipulation and family sabotage." The boardroom fell silent as the rebuke landed. Reed seemed to shrink in his chair, the Sterling. Confidence that had defined his bearing now noticeably absent. Alexander cleared his throat. "The board will now vote on the recommendation to terminate Reed Sterling's employment with Sterling Enterprises effective immediately, with forfeiture of unvested stock options, as specified in the ethics violation clause of his contract." Reed's attorney leaned forward. "My client deserves an opportunity to present his side." "Your client has had that opportunity for the past hour," Alexander replied firmly. "The evidence speaks for itself." As board members registered their votes electronically, the outcome appeared on the central screen, unanimous in favor of termination. Reed stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You'll regret this. All of you." His gaze swept the room, landing finally on Vanessa. "Especially you. You were supposed to be loyal to the Sterling name." "I am loyal to Sterling Enterprises," Vanessa replied evenly. "To its values and its future. That's why I accepted the CEO position when Thaddeus recommended me." The revelation that Thaddeus had personally endorsed her seemed to be the final blow. Reed's face contorted with a complex mixture of rage and humiliation. "Security will escort you to clear your office," Alexander said, signaling the conclusion of Reed's corporate career. "All company devices and access credentials must be surrendered before you leave the building." As Reed was led from the boardroom, his final glance backward carried a promise of retribution that sent a chill through the assembled executives. The Sterling brothers' rivalry, long simmering beneath corporate politics, had escalated beyond boardroom maneuvers to something more personal and potentially dangerous. Across town, unaware of the exact moment of his brother's downfall, Thaddeus sat in a parent-teacher conference at Mason's school autumn beside him as they discussed their son's academic progress. "Mason's scientific curiosity is exceptional," Mrs. Harrington explained, showing them a notebook filled with the boy's careful observations and drawings. "His planet project shows understanding well beyond first-grade level." Pride swelled in Thaddeus's chest as he examined Mason's work. The precise labels, the careful attention to detail, the questions noted in childish handwriting along the margins. These were Sterling traits channeled into discovery rather than dominance, curiosity rather than control. "He works on it every night," Autumn said, smiling. "Sometimes we have to make him stop for dinner. That persistence will serve him well," Mrs. Harrington noted, "though I should mention that Mason has been talking quite a lot about his family situation during share time." Thaddeus tensed slightly. "Is that creating problems?" "Not at all," the teacher reassured them. "Children, are remarkably adaptable. Mason simply explains that he has a new dad now, and that his family lives at the lake where they can see the stars better. Her expression grew more serious. However, there was an incident last week with another parent that I should mention. Autumn leaned forward. What kind of incident? A mother made some unfortunate comments within Mason's hearing about your family situation. Mrs. Harrington's distaste was evident. I addressed it immediately, and the principal has spoken with the parent in question, but I wanted you to be aware in case Mason mentions it. The thought of Mason facing judgment or cruelty because of adult circumstances ignited a protective fury in Thaddeus. What exactly was said? It doesn't bear repeating, Mrs. Harrington replied firmly. What matters is that Mason handled it with remarkable composure. He simply said, "My dad is my dad and my mum is my mum and we're a family. It doesn't matter how we started." The simple wisdom in his son's response left Thaddeus momentarily speechless. 6 years old, yet somehow Mason had distilled the essence of what Thaddeus himself had only recently come to understand. That family was defined by love and commitment, not conventional timelines or traditional structures. As they left the school, walking together toward the parking lot, Autumn's phone chimed with a news alert. She glanced at the screen, then showed it to Thaddeus. Sterling Enterprises Board ousts Reed. Sterling amid ethics scandal. It's done then, Thaddeus said quietly, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. For all their rivalry, Reed was still his brother, the boy who had once followed him everywhere, looking up to him with admiration, before ambition had poisoned their relationship. Will he fight it? Autumn asked as they reached the car. Almost certainly, Thaddeus replied, opening her door. Reed has never accepted defeat gracefully. Are you concerned about what he might do next? The question hung between them as Thaddeus circled to the driver's side, considering the depths to which his brother had already sunk the lengths to, which wounded pride might drive him. Reed's power came from his position at Sterling Enterprises, he finally answered, starting the engine. Without that, His words were cut short by another alert on Autumn's phone. Her sharp intake of breath made Thaddeus glance over. What is it? It's about Lorelei, she said, her voice tight as she read from the screen. She's called a press conference for tomorrow morning. The headline says she's planning to share her truth about the Sterling family scandal. The implications settled over them like a shadow. Lorelei, with her carefully crafted public image and shrewd understanding of media narratives, could inflict significant damage if she chose to align herself with Reed against Thaddeus. So much for our quiet life at the lake, Autumn murmured, staring out the window as they pulled away from the school. Thaddeus reached across to take her hand, a gesture that had become natural over the weeks of shared parenting and gradually deepening connection. Whatever Lorelei says tomorrow, whatever Reed does next, we'll face it together, he promised. The truth has a way of emerging, remember, like water finding cracks in a foundation. He quoted Autumn's own words from weeks earlier, when the discovery of Mason's paternity had first upended their lives. She turned to him with a small smile of recognition, her fingers tightening around his. The difference is, she replied softly, our foundation isn't cracking anymore. It's growing stronger every day. As they drove toward home, toward Mason waiting with his grandmother eager to share details of his day, neither noticed the black sedan that pulled away from the curb to follow them, its driver reporting their movements to Reed Sterling, whose plans for retribution were already taking shape. The corporate reckoning had concluded, but the personal one was just beginning. The morning of Lorelei's press conference dawned with threatening skies, dark clouds gathering over the lake, like a physical manifestation of the tension building in the Sterling household. Thaddeus stood at the kitchen window, coffee cooling in, his hand as he watched the approaching storm front, his mind racing with potential scenarios. You should be there, Autumn said, entering the kitchen in her robe, hair still damp from the shower. Whatever she's planning to say, you should be present to respond. Thaddeus turned, taking in the concern etched in her features. And give the media exactly what they want, the estranged couple facing off in public. No, that's playing by their rules. Then what's our strategy? Just wait to see what damage she inflicts. Before Thaddeus could respond, his phone rang, Vanessa Chen calling, earlier than business protocol would normally dictate. "Have you seen it?" Vanessa asked without preamble when he answered. "Seen what? The press conference hasn't started yet." "Not the press conference. The document package Reid delivered to board members last night." The tension in Vanessa's voice was palpable even through the phone. "Thaddeus, he has proof of payments from Lorelei to Autumn going back years. Regular transfers tagged as MS Maintenance in the accounting records." Thaddeus's gaze snapped to Autumn, who was watching him with growing alarm, able to hear only his side of the conversation. "Reid is claiming this proves a conspiracy between you, Lorelei, and Autumn to conceal Mason's existence for business advantages," Vanessa continued. "He's positioned it as corporate fraud, arguing that shareholders were deceived about potential succession risks. The accusation was so twisted, so cleverly constructed to weaponize the truth that Thaddeus momentarily struggled to formulate a response. "It's nonsense," he finally said. "I didn't know about Mason until 2 months ago. I wasn't party to any arrangement between Lorelei and Autumn." "I believe you," Vanessa replied. "But Reid has presented this very convincingly. He's calling for a shareholder vote to remove you as chairman on grounds of fiduciary negligence." As they discussed immediate counter-strategies, Autumn slipped from the kitchen, returning moments later, fully dressed, her expression now carefully composed. "I need to tell you something," she said when Thaddeus ended the call. "About the payments. From Lorelei." Thaddeus set his phone down, fighting to keep accusations from his voice. "You told me she paid you to keep Mason away from me. You didn't mention it was an ongoing arrangement." "It wasn't what you're thinking," Autumn countered, her chin lifting slightly, in the gesture of dignity he'd come to recognize when she felt defensive. "After Lorelei discovered I was pregnant, she came to me privately. She said she knew the child was yours, that the timing made it obvious. And she offered you money to keep quiet." Thaddeus supplied the bitterness he'd thought resolved resurfacing. "She offered me options," Autumn corrected. "I could leave with a generous severance, or I could stay with certain conditions. The payments weren't bribes, Thaddeus. They were child support, the only way she could ensure Mason was provided for, without exposing what she saw as a threat to the company." The distinction shifted his understanding slightly, though the deception still stung. "Why didn't you tell me this when everything first came out?" "Because it's complicated and ugly, and filled with details that don't reflect well on any of us," Autumn answered honestly. "And because I was afraid it would change how you were beginning to see me, as something more than just the housekeeper who had your child." The vulnerability in her admission disarmed his anger somewhat. "Reid is using this to claim we all conspired together. But that's absurd. You didn't know anything about Mason or the arrangement." Autumn moved closer, urgency in her voice. "Thaddeus, I'll testify to that. I'll tell anyone who needs to hear it that you were kept in the dark." "It might not matter," Thaddeus replied, running a hand through his hair. "In corporate governance, perception often outweighs reality. Reid knows that." The distant rumble of thunder punctuated his words, the storm drawing nearer as another crisis loomed. "What about Lorelei's press conference?" Autumn asked. "Could that make things worse?" Before Thaddeus could respond, Mason appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school, his expression serious beyond his years. "Dad, Mom, is something wrong?" The instinctive sharing of a concerned glance between Thaddeus and Autumn, the unconscious parental communication, struck Thaddeus as both novel and profound. 2 months ago, they had barely known each other beyond employer and employee. Now they functioned as a unit aligned in their priority to protect their son. "Just some work problems," Thaddeus answered, forcing a reassuring smile. "Nothing for you to worry about." Mason studied them both with the unnerving perceptiveness children sometimes display. "Is it about those papers grandmother was reading? The ones that made her angry?" Autumn's brow furrowed. "What papers, sweetheart?" "The ones that came in the special delivery last night. They had pictures of us on them." Thaddeus and Autumn exchanged another glance, alarm replacing concern. "Mason, where are these papers now?" Thaddeus asked carefully. "In the recycling. Grandmother said they were trash and didn't belong in our house." While Autumn guided Mason toward breakfast, Thaddeus retrieved the discarded envelope from the recycling bin. Inside, he found what was clearly a duplicate of the package Reed had delivered to board members, damning in its selective presentation. Of facts, photos of Autumn and Mason, paired with bank statements showing Lorelei's regular payments, all crafted to suggest a three-way conspiracy. But there was something else, something Reed likely hadn't included in the board package, a handwritten note addressed to Elaine Walsh. Your daughter and grandson would be better off without Thaddeus in their lives. His empire is about to fall. Don't let them be collateral damage. The naked threat, the attempt to drive a wedge between him and Autumn's family, ignited a cold fury in Thaddeus. Reed had crossed from corporate warfare into something more personal and vindictive. Elaine entered the kitchen, then her expression softening at the sight of her grandson, but hardening again when she noticed the papers in Thaddeus's hand. I see you found that garbage, she remarked, moving to start a pot of tea. I considered burning it, but that seemed melodramatic. Did you believe any of it? Thaddeus asked directly. Elaine's assessment was frank, her gaze unflinching. I believed the parts that rang true, that you were kept in ignorance of my grandson's existence, that my daughter accepted financial support from your wife in exchange for silence, that your brother is a snake who would use a child as leverage in a corporate power struggle. She sighed, adding more gently, what I don't believe is that you're the villain in this story, Thaddeus. Complicit in its origins, perhaps, but not the villain. The simple vote of confidence from this woman who had every reason to distrust him, to see him as the wealthy man who had used her daughter and ignored his child, affected Thaddeus deeply. Thank you, he said simply. The kitchen television, turned low for morning news, suddenly showed the exterior of Sterling Tower, where media had gathered for Lorelei's press conference. Thaddeus increased the volume, just as his soon-to-be ex-wife approached the podium immaculate in a tailored navy suit that echoed Sterling Enterprises' corporate colors. Mason glanced up from his cereal. That's the lady who came to our house, the one in the pictures with you. Yes, Thaddeus confirmed, sharing another look with Autumn. That's Lorelei. They watched in tense silence as Lorelei arranged her notes, her perfect composure revealing nothing of her intentions. When she began speaking, her voice carried the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to public statements. Good morning. Thank you for coming. I've called this press conference to address the ongoing speculation about my husband, Thaddeus Sterling, his son Mason, and the recent leadership changes at Sterling Enterprises. She paused, scanning the assembled reporters with cool authority, before continuing. There have been many versions of this story circulating in the media. Most contain elements of truth, wrapped in layers of speculation and sensationalism. Today, I want to set the record straight about my role in these events. Thaddeus felt Autumn tense beside him, both of them acutely aware of Mason listening while pretending interest in his breakfast. 6 years ago, Lorelei continued, I discovered that my husband had fathered a child with an employee of our household. This revelation came at a critical time for Sterling Enterprises, when stability in leadership was essential for a major international expansion. She paused again, her expression revealing nothing of her inner thoughts. I made a decision to protect the company, its employees, and its shareholders from potential disruption. I approached Ms. Walsh and offered her a choice: financial support for her child in exchange for discretion. This arrangement was my initiative alone. Thaddeus was not aware of his son's existence, nor of my intervention. The admission, contrary to what they had expected, left Thaddeus momentarily speechless. Across the table, Elaine's eyebrows rose in surprise, while Autumn stared at the screen in disbelief. Recent attempts to characterize this as a three-way conspiracy are categorically false, Lorelei stated firmly. They represent a desperate attempt by Reed Sterling to salvage his reputation and position after his unethical actions were exposed by the board. She straightened her voice, taking on additional authority. While I cannot defend the wisdom of my decision in retrospect, I can clarify that my actions were taken to protect Sterling Enterprises during a vulnerable period. If there is blame to be assigned for the concealment of Mason's paternity, that responsibility is mine alone. The press room erupted with questions, reporters shouting over each other for Lorelei's attention. She raised a hand, regaining control. One final statement, she said, her voice cutting through the clamor. Thaddeus Sterling has chosen to embrace his responsibilities as Mason's father. He has stepped back from daily operations at Sterling Enterprises to focus on his family. Whatever our personal differences, I respect that choice and believe it should be honored without further media intrusion. With that, she closed her portfolio and departed the podium, ignoring the barrage of follow-up questions as she exited the room with characteristic poise. In the stunned silence that followed in the lake house kitchen, Mason looked between the adults with innocent curiosity. Why was that lady talking about me on TV? Autumn recovered first, her response gentle but honest. Because grown-ups sometimes make things more complicated than they need to be, sweetheart. But she was trying to fix something that got broken. Did it work? Mason asked, his simple question cutting to the heart of the matter. Thaddeus found himself meeting Autumn's gaze across the table, both of them searching for an answer that would make sense to a 6-year-old while acknowledging the complex adult reality. I think, Thaddeus said carefully, that it's a start. His phone began buzzing with messages, from Vanessa, from board members, from his legal team, all reacting to Lorelei's unexpected defense. But as rain finally began falling outside, drumming against the windows in a soothing rhythm, Thaddeus found himself focused not on the corporate implications, but on the family gathered around his kitchen table. Elaine, who had extended cautious acceptance despite ample reason for resentment. Autumn, whose quiet strength and dignity had sustained her through years of an impossible situation. And Mason, innocently finishing his breakfast, unaware that his very existence had just reverberated through corporate boardrooms and media outlets across the city. The revelation had come, not the one Reed had engineered, but one more powerful, in its honesty and unexpected grace. Lorelei, in finally speaking her truth, had given them all a chance at something resembling peace. Or so it seemed until Thaddeus's phone rang again, this time with a call from Sterling Tower Security. Mr. Sterling, the head of security said, tension evident in his voice. I apologize for disturbing you, but there's a situation here requiring your immediate attention. Your brother Reed has barricaded himself in the executive suite and is threatening to release confidential company information unless the board reverses its decision. The brief moment of relief evaporated as Thaddeus realized the storm hadn't passed after all. It had merely entered its most dangerous phase. I'm on my way, he replied, already reaching for his jacket, knowing that this confrontation with his brother could no longer be postponed. As he prepared to leave, explaining the situation to Autumn in hurried whispers, while Mason finished breakfast, Thaddeus found himself torn between two worlds, the corporate realm he'd once ruled without question and the family sanctuary he'd only recently discovered. The final battle for Sterling Enterprises loomed, but for the first time Thaddeus entered the fray with absolute clarity about what and who was truly worth fighting for. Rain poured in sheets as Thaddeus entered Sterling Tower, droplets cascading from his shoulders onto the marble floor of the lobby. Security personnel nodded respectfully as he passed, not as CEO anymore, but as the chairman whose name still adorned the building. Mr. Sterling, the head of security, greeted him at the executive elevator. Your brother has locked himself in your former office. He's threatening to release confidential client information to competitors unless his demands are met. What exactly are his demands? Thaddeus asked as they ascended. Reinstatement to his position, a public apology from the board, and the security chief hesitated. And your permanent removal from any association with Sterling Enterprises. Thaddeus nodded, unsurprised by his brother's vindictiveness. Who else is up there? Ms. Chen is coordinating with legal in the conference room. Mr. Alexander arrived 10 minutes ago. We've evacuated the rest of the executive floor as a precaution. When the elevator doors opened, Thaddeus was struck by the eerie quiet of the normally bustling executive level. Following the security chief toward the conference room, he heard raised voices. Vanessa and Alexander engaged in heated debate. Cannot negotiate with this kind of behavior, Alexander was saying as Thaddeus entered. The board has made its decision. Reed is attempting corporate blackmail. The client information he's threatening to release could cause irreparable damage, Vanessa countered. We have to consider all options to contain this. They both turned as Thaddeus cleared his throat. I'd like to speak with him. Absolutely. Not Alexander objected immediately. Security is working on accessing the office. Once they do, Reed will be removed and arrested for corporate espionage. And in the meantime, he potentially releases information that damages our clients and partners, Thaddeus pointed out. This isn't just about Sterling Enterprises anymore. Real people could be hurt by what Reed's threatening. Vanessa studied him carefully. What do you think you can accomplish by talking to him? Reed is clearly unhinged at this point. He's my brother, Thaddeus replied simply. Before he was my rival, before he was a Sterling Enterprises executive, he was my little brother. If anyone can reach him, it's me. The simple truth of this statement seemed to resonate with both Vanessa and Alexander. After a moment's consideration, Alexander nodded reluctantly. We'll give you 15 minutes, but security stays outside the door ready to intervene. Thaddeus made his way down the familiar corridor to the CEO's office, his office until recently. Now technically Vanessa's, though Reed had appropriated it in his desperation. He knocked firmly on the closed door. "Reed," he called. "It's Thaddeus, I'm alone, let me in." Silence greeted him. Then the sound of movement inside. The door cracked open, revealing Reed's face. Haggard, unshaven, his usual impeccable appearance deteriorated into something almost unrecognizable. "Come to gloat," Reed asked, his voice hoarse. "To witness the fall of the brother who dared challenge the mighty Thaddeus." "I've come to talk," Thaddeus replied calmly. "Just talk." After a moment's consideration, Reed stepped back, allowing Thaddeus to enter. The office was in disarray. Papers scattered across the desk computer monitors, glowing with open files, a half-empty bottle of scotch perched precariously near the edge. "Quite the dramatic stand you're making," Thaddeus observed carefully, keeping judgment from his tone. Reed laughed, a brittle, dangerous sound. "Drama, is that what you call fighting for my rightful place, for my legacy?" "Reed," Thaddeus said gently, "this isn't how legacies are built. You know that." "Don't patronize me," Reed snapped, moving to the window where rain continued lashing against the glass. "You've always done that. Treated me like the little brother who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of your master plans." "That wasn't my intention," Thaddeus began, but Reed cut him off with a sharp gesture. "You had everything," he said, voice dropping to something almost vulnerable. "Father's approval, the CEO position, the perfect wife, the Sterling legacy secure, in your capable hands." His laugh was hollow. "And then you threw it all away for what, some kid you didn't even know existed. Some family fantasy at the lake." The raw bitterness in Reed's words revealed wounds far deeper than corporate rivalry, wounds that stretched back to childhood, to a father who had clearly favored his older son, to a family dynamic that had shaped them both in ways neither had fully acknowledged. "I didn't throw it away, Reed," Thaddeus said quietly. "I found something I didn't realize was missing." "How poetic," Reed sneered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "The great Thaddeus Sterling discovers the joys of fatherhood and abandons the empire he built. Meanwhile, the brother who dedicated his life to the same company is tossed aside like garbage." Thaddeus moved closer, really seeing his brother perhaps for the first time in years, not as a rival or a threat, but as a man desperate for validation, for the recognition that had always flowed so naturally to Thaddeus. "You weren't tossed aside because I found my son," Thaddeus said carefully. "You were removed because you chose methods that violated everything Sterling Enterprises stands for. You weaponized a child, Reed, my child. I exposed the truth." Reed slammed his hand against the desk, sending papers fluttering to the floor. "The great moral leader keeping a secret son with the help the board needed to know what kind of man was really running this company." "The board already knew," Thaddeus replied calmly. "I told them myself before you had the chance. The difference is I acknowledged my mistakes. I took responsibility for my actions." Reed turned away, his shoulders rigid with tension. "And now you get to be the noble father, the honorable chairman who sacrificed his CEO position for family values, while I'm—" His voice broke slightly. "While I'm the villain of the story." For the first time, Thaddeus recognized the depth of his brother's pain. Not just the loss of position or power, but the loss of identity, of purpose, of belonging. In that moment, he saw not the manipulative executive, who had schemed against him, but the boy who had once followed him everywhere, desperate for inclusion and approval. "It doesn't have to end this way, Reed," Thaddeus said, moving to stand beside his brother at the window. "This isn't the final chapter of your story unless you make it so." Reed glanced at him suspiciously. "What's that supposed to mean? The board has spoken. You've won. Again." "This isn't about winning," Thaddeus replied, surprising himself with the genuine truth of the statement. "It's about finding a way forward that honors what matters most." "And what matters most to you now? Thaddeus, your new family, your perfect redemption arc." The question, for all its bitterness, deserved an honest answer. Thaddeus considered his response carefully. "What matters most is legacy, but not the kind I used to pursue. Not buildings with our name on them or stock prices or market domination." He looked directly at his brother. "What matters is the echo we leave in the lives we touch, the truth we're willing to face about ourselves." Reed's laugh held less venom, now more weariness. "Always the philosopher when it suits you." "I'm serious, Reed. There's a path forward from this, but it requires something neither of us has been particularly good at." "What's that?" "Humility," Thaddeus answered simply. "The courage to admit when we've been wrong." For a long moment Reed said nothing. The only sound in the office, the steady drumming of rain against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. Then, to Thaddeus's surprise, his brother's shoulders slumped in something resembling surrender. "I don't know how to be anything other than what I've been," Reed admitted, his voice barely audible. "Father's second choice, your shadow, the Sterling, who couldn't quite measure up." The vulnerability in the confession struck Thaddeus deeply. How had he never seen the depth of his brother's pain? How had success blinded him to the damage inflicted by their father's unequal affection? "You don't have to be defined by any of those things," Thaddeus said gently. "Not anymore." Reed turned. To face him, eyes reddened from alcohol and exhaustion. "What exactly are you proposing? Walk out of here with me now. Surrender the confidential information. Issue a public statement taking responsibility for your actions." Thaddeus held his brother's gaze steadily. "In return, I'll ensure you retain your Sterling Enterprises stock, and I'll personally fund a new venture for you, something separate from the family legacy, something you can build on your own terms." Suspicion flickered across Reed's features. "Why would you do that after everything I've done?" "Because you're my brother," Thaddeus answered simply, "and because I understand now what I didn't before, that the Sterling legacy isn't just about success. It's about redemption when we fail. It's about the courage to begin again." Outside, the office security personnel waited tensely, prepared to intervene at any moment. Alexander paced the hallway, while Vanessa monitored the situation from the conference room. All of them expected the confrontation to end in Reed's forcible removal, perhaps even arrest. None of them expected to see the Sterling brothers emerge side by side. Reed subdued, but composed as he handed a flash drive to Vanessa with a quiet apology. Later that afternoon, as rain gave way to clearing skies, Thaddeus returned to the lake, house where Autumn waited on the porch, tension evident in her posture, until she saw his expression. "It's over," she asked as he climbed the steps to join her. "As much as something like this can ever be over," he replied, settling into the chair beside hers. "Reed and I reached an understanding. He's leaving Sterling Enterprises, but with dignity and support for a fresh start." Autumn studied him curiously. "After everything he did, you're helping him." Thaddeus gazed out at the lake, where sunshine now sparkled on water still ruffled by the passing storm. "I realized something today. All these years I thought I was building a legacy through corporate success, through the Sterling name on buildings and balance sheets. But legacy isn't something you construct out of steel and stock options." "What is it then?" Autumn asked softly. "It's the echo of truth in the lives you touch," Thaddeus answered, reaching for her hand. "It's the courage to face your mistakes and begin again. It's understanding that the most valuable things can't be measured in dollars or market share." The simple contact of their fingers intertwining felt more significant than any contract he'd ever signed. A connection built slowly over weeks of shared purpose, mutual respect, and gradually deepening trust. "Where's Mason?" Thaddeus asked, suddenly eager to see his son. Down at the dock with Elaine, they're looking for that turtle he's been tracking all week. Autumn's smile held warmth that had once been carefully guarded, but now flowed freely between them. As they sat together in comfortable silence, watching Mason and his grandmother by the water's edge, Thaddeus reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 months. From successful CEO to disgraced executive to chairman, finding a new balance. From childless businessman to father, learning the contours of his son's mind and heart. From employer to partner, discovering in Autumn a strength and grace that complemented his own evolving priorities. "I've been thinking," he said after a while, "about what happens when your lease ends next month." Autumn turned to him, wariness flickering briefly across her features. "What about it? I thought perhaps you might consider making this arrangement more permanent. Not just for Mason's sake, but for us." The invitation hung between them, weighted with possibility. Autumn considered it thoughtfully, her response characteristically measured. "We've been through extraordinary circumstances together," she said, "but I'm not sure if what we've built is a foundation or just a shelter from the storm." "There's only one way to find out," Thaddeus replied, understanding her caution, but unwilling to retreat from the truth of his evolving feelings. Below them, Mason spotted a movement in the water and called excitedly to his grandmother, pointing with the unrestrained enthusiasm that had become a constant source of joy in Thaddeus's life. The boy glanced up toward the porch, waving when he saw his parents watching. "Dad, Mum, we found him, come see." The simple summons, so ordinary yet so profound in its uncomplicated acceptance of their family unit, brought smiles to both their faces. As they rose to join Mason at the dock, Autumn paused, her hand still in Thaddeus's. "I'd like to find out," she said quietly, answering his unspoken question. "One day at a time, like we agreed." The honesty in her eyes, the cautious optimism in her voice meant more to Thaddeus than any corporate achievement ever had. This was success measured not in acquisitions or market dominance, but in trust earned and connection deepened. Together they descended to the dock, where Mason waited impatiently, eager to share his discovery. The late afternoon sun bathed them in golden light as they knelt beside him, following his pointing finger to where a small turtle basked on a partially submerged log. "I told you he'd come back," Mason said with satisfaction. "I wrote it in my observation journal. Turtles always return to places where they feel safe." The simple wisdom in his son's words struck Thaddeus with unexpected force. Wasn't that what he'd found here at the lakeside, what they'd all found together? A place of safety, of belonging, of truth, without pretense or performance. As Mason continued his excited explanation of turtle habits, Thaddeus caught Autumn's gaze over their son's head. The understanding that passed between them required no words, an acknowledgement of how far they'd come, and the journey still ahead, a shared commitment to the sanctuary they'd created together. The corporate world continued its rhythms in the icy city beyond the lake. Sterling Enterprises adapted to new leadership. The media eventually lost interest in their unconventional family story, finding fresher scandals to pursue. Reed began the long process of rebuilding his life, separate from his brother's shadow. But here in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the boy between them, the connection growing stronger each day, and the simple truth that family wasn't defined by conventional timelines or traditional structures, but by love freely given and received. Sometimes, Thaddeus reflected silently, watching his son's animated expression, when we have the courage to face the truth directly, life finds a way to heal itself. The observation Mason had written about his turtle applied equally to all of them, creatures returning to places of safety, of truth, of belonging. Not a perfect family by conventional standards, perhaps, but authentic in ways that mattered most. And in that authenticity, Thaddeus had finally discovered the legacy worth building, not in steel and glass towers bearing the sterling name, but in the heart and mind of his son, and in the bonds of trust with the woman beside him. Some truths emerged like water finding cracks in a foundation. Others echoed across generations, reverberating in unexpected ways. The most important truths Thaddeus now understood were those lived daily in small moments of connection and love. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long golden paths across the lake's surface, the three of them remained on the dock, father, mother, son, bound not by convention, but by choice. Their unconventional beginning transformed into something stronger and more genuine than Thaddeus had ever thought possible. In the distance, a loon called across the water, its haunting cry carrying across the lake like a benediction for what they'd found together. A family built not on appearance or expectation, but on the solid foundation of truth finally acknowledged and embraced.